here? You ever notice that the information that we're being fed doesn't always add up to the truth? Do you ever look out your window at night when the rain's falling down? You ever look down the street and wonder what is going on around you? You ever look out at night and ask yourself, is this all that I am? Where am I? What am I? Is this all there is? Is this real life? As technology continues to bring us closer together, it also tears us further apart. We watch the skies and look at the planet around us and its natural beauty as it continues to march forward on and on and on, unending, unceasing, unwavering. And yet our world, everything that we've built, crumbles around us. We wonder, is this it? Is there more? There's got to be. We can search. We want to learn. We want to understand. We want to see all that we can see, know all that we can know. We want to look out there. We want to peek behind the veil. We want to ask the questions that nobody will answer. We want to light those fires, the sparks that ignite a curiosity in us. And we ask ourselves, what is out beyond all of that? Beyond the edge of reality.
Good evening, everyone. How y'all doing? Good to see you all out there. So happy to have everyone joining us wherever you are, whatever you're doing. It's time for another Edge of Reality. I know, it sounds crazy. We're doing a twofer today because, earlier today, if you didn't already know, I covered the UAP congressional hearing, which was explosive to say the least. So definitely, if you have a chance later on, definitely go back. If you haven't already seen it, go back and check out the replay on that. Some absolute bombshells delivered in that whole thing. But tonight we're doing something a little different because this was a live stream that got put together quite a while ago. We had this idea that came up a while back, and it was centered around specifically a very specific time. And I have a very, very cool story, a very awesome show, and I have a very special guest that we will get to in just a little bit. So, yeah, I just want to take some time when everyone is to kind of let everybody file in, say hey to everybody, and just kind of see how things progress as the night goes on. And all right, let's go around, see who's here already. Iris in Texas, how you doing? Good to see you. American Steve, hello. It's time to take to the high seas for this one. And hello to everyone on Rumble 2 who may see this. Yep, we are streaming live to not just YouTube. We're streaming to YouTube, to Rumble, and to Twitter, Twitter, X, whatever it is this week. I don't know. That's just a thing. We are streaming to not just 2 locations. We're streaming to 3 whole locations tonight, folks. And that is big for me because I've never done that before. So, this is pretty awesome. So you'll be able to catch my my content in even more places. All right. And Captain, have fun. Good to see you, my friend. Always happy to have you on board. Mrs. K. Griff, hey, and have a great night. Thank you so much for coming to join. Appreciate you. Murph's Turf, what's going on, Murph? Good friend. I appreciate you being here. I say that was a hell of a hearing today, and I'm glad that you were able to provide the link. I'm going to say Murph here was an absolute lifesaver. We had the links for the stream already set up, and everything was ready to go. And strangely enough, like 10 minutes before the congressional hearing got underway, the whole thing changed. The screen blocked out. They changed the name. Everything went away from the actual, like, the government live stream that I pulled off of, like congress.gov. And I suddenly scrambled 10 minutes before this thing was supposed to go live to find a stream. And thank God for Murph's Turf. Murph dropped the link over in our Discord chat, that from News Nation. That was the one we used for the entire stream. So huge shout out to Murph's Turf. Thank you so much for that. And Oksana Bonita, howdy. Nanu. Oh, goodness. Good to see you all there. All right. And yep, Murph's Turf say there is no way we were going to miss today. Teamwork, Kaiser. Amen. Oh, my. So, all right. Good to see everybody here tonight. So, let me go ahead and check here. And there we go. So as we're getting the final things set to go for the night, so yeah, we're talking about a bit of a one that I had never heard of, and yeah, this is a mystery that I didn't know anything about. So I was very curious when I was approached about this one and asked to look into it. So let me not delay any further. Let me go ahead and bring on our expert guest for the evening, our good friend of the channel, good friend of mine, Grand Admiral Harlock. Oop, I got the wrong thing set up there. There we go. How you doing, man? It's been a while.
Just fine. How you been? I've been away for a while. You've been busy since I've been gone.
Yeah, I say last time we did Edge of Reality, it was episode 5. We did the Titanic.
Yes.
That was
a minute.
And we still have got to do a part 2 on that one because I still get questions. I still get questions from that one. All right. So
we've got a full chat tonight, eh?
Yeah, we got currently looking like 7 over here on YouTube, another 3 further on Rumble. Usually folks kind of filter in as things kind of get started, so that number will only go up from here. And I went ahead and let everybody know what's going on. I know there's a couple of other live streams going on, but yeah, I think those usually kind of peter out after about an hour or two, so we'll probably be picking up some steam definitely in that second half there, but this is going to be a fun one. So I have to kind of backtrack for a minute there. This is really cool. So you actually, I remember distinctly, I came to talk to you like and propose the idea about the Titanic stream.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I talked to you about it. I mentioned the Titanic stream and I mentioned like, hey, I want to do this. People are interested. And you said, well, hey, if you're interested in that one, I got one that just might, tickle your fancy as well. I'm like, okay, pitch it to me. And y'all, this man is famous for his elevator pitch on these types of topics. So to get me interested, that is saying something. And especially, this was a very fascinating one. So, you know what? I got to say, thank you for turning me on to this particular one. And you know what? Without further ado, man, let me just go ahead and turn it over to you. Set the stage, man. Tell me what's going on. I'll go ahead and I'll make you a little bigger on the screen there. There you go.
Well, the story we're talking about tonight is a story of a very large steamship that disappeared in 1909 under very mysterious circumstances. To this day, we have not located her wreck. We have no idea what exactly happened. And quite frankly, I think that this could make one hell of a Hollywood movie or video series, something. We don't know what happened to the passengers exactly. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence. A lot that was dismissed from the official inquiry, but was still interesting nonetheless and may warrant further consideration. But I think the most important place to start is perhaps the most unusual part of this story. I'd like to introduce you to an individual. Before I introduce you to him, I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to tell you a dream, a nightmare perhaps, that was very much real. You startle awake in your bed, roused from a peaceful rest by some unseen and unknown force. Taking a moment, you glance around your first-class stateroom. Everything seems exactly as you remember it, being though with a strange tinting of red. Looking from your stateroom porthole, you see a scene that fills you with a deep sense of dread. The sight you behold is a crimson sky, casting its ominous light upon a boiling and heaving sea. And with that, I must pause because I must have you share an image for me.
Okay. Alrighty. And let me go ahead and just swap over this way so that way whenever I get that up there, I can. There we go.
Oops.
And yeah, don't forget you can actually hit the present button down there, and I can just it'll pop up on my side, and I can just throw it right into the stream.
Select share screen.
You could use that, or yeah, however you got it on yours. Merch Turf, I don't think it's supposed to sound steamy, but it certainly sounds like it. There we go. And you know when you got that photo up there, I see this down here, but it's just our stream.
Okay. Why is that not sharing?
There should be a way to like share a tab or something else in there, you know, if you need to.
Slides, is that a no? Hold on, that's.
Okay, I see.
I don't know if that will share. Is it sharing?
I see your file folder.
Okay. This was not what I anticipated at all.
Oh, technical difficulties. Don't you always love those?
I do. Well, I guess this is why we leave extra time for this, right? God.
Yeah, this is why I usually try to go ahead and we try to do a technical run through.
All right, we're going to attempt this one more time, I guess. Excellent.
There we go. I see it now.
Okay.
All right. Got it. There we go. AP says computers suck sometimes. Yep, I agree.
Do. They really do. They really do.
All right, on your go.
Anyways, You feel that distinct, slow roll under your feet as the liner begins to canter to the opposite side, as she is buffeted by growing swells. Feeling the urge to investigate further, you don your robe and slippers and make your way out into the hallway. Walking carefully down the now slanting hallway, you make your way to the foyer and stairway, hoping to encounter someone to inquire with along the way regarding the ship's unusual circumstances. Though in all your walking, you have yet to encounter another living soul. At this point, without encountering a single individual on a ship of 213 passengers and crew, you resolve to find your own answers to this mystery. You begin to make your way topside, perhaps to the bridge, but certainly somewhere with a vantage point, high enough to see the entirety of this strange meteorological event over the tall rollers crashing against and over the black hull of the steamer. Upon the boat deck now, and walking forward to the bridge, you cannot help this growing feeling all is wrong. The towering black funnels, sporting the blue anchor logo of the ship's owners, belching a thick column of dark smoke, suggesting surely someone must be aboard. You steady yourself and struggle to keep your footing with each series of violent shudders that ripple through the hull of the ship, as the ship's bow plows headlong into ever-growing swells, sending that bow diving into each wave without rising up and over, as any properly designed ship would do. Under these exact same circumstances. Yet this was not a properly designed ship. Approaching the stairway and leading to the bridge, you hear something that leaves you frozen in place. A thunderous voice calls out above the howling winds and the roaring waves. A voice of dire warning, of impending doom, of destruction, perhaps also a voice of malicious intent. One word alone is called aloud by the voice: Waratah! Turning your head in the direction of the voice, you see nothing on deck, yet your vision soon casts over the rolling sea to a massive figure standing over well above the waves. He seems to be wearing some very ancient and strange dress, with a long sword outstretched before him, and his right hand pointing it to the ship, or perhaps at you. Clutched in his left hand is a blood-soaked cloth, still dripping red. Again and again he calls out, Waratah! Waratah! As he slowly approaches the ship, until in an instant, the world flashes to black. You inhale deep as you awaken in your bed. Blinking your eyes clear, you can see your room again, just as you remember it being when you went to sleep. The only difference being the light of the early morning dawn as the sun begins to rise on another day for this little community at sea. After yet another night of having the same vivid nightmare, you have had enough of this ship, and you've made your decision. Once the ship docks in Durban, you will take your leave of this ship and find another way to Cape Town. For now, though, it was time to freshen up and get dressed. First time for breakfast.
Wow.
That dream took place on or about July the 21st, 1909. Just a few days from Durban, South Africa, on board the steamship SS Waratah, which, as we will go through, has become, quite frankly, the greatest maritime mystery. I would, in my opinion, place it at the very top the pantheon of lost and missing ships. To start with, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Blue Anchor Line.
All right. Let's
Now,
yeah, so kind of give me a rundown. What's I mean, yeah, you already got my attention.
so I want to take you all back in time to 1869. Now,
Okay.
1869 is a very interesting time, a very interesting year in the world of transportation, movement of peoples and cargoes. And May of that year, we have the United States completing the first transcontinental railroad between the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railroads, meeting in Promontory Point, Utah. We also have in November of that year the Suez Canal opening. We have sometime in July, the White Star Line, after forming the previous year, ordering its first 4 proper steamships from Harland and Wolff shipyards in Belfast, Ireland. And so it seemed the right time, if you will, to form a shipping company. And so a Danish immigrant to the UK, a Wilhelm Lund,
Okay.
decided to, well, open up a company. He had previously worked in the business of sailmaking for the clipper ships that were going back and forth between Britain and China, and got really acquainted in the trade as well as managing shipping. And so in 1869, after having previously had a share in a ship and earning a lot of money, decided he wanted to go his own way and build his own ship and open up his own company. So in 1869, he founded the Blue Anchor Line and built the first ship, the Ambassador, which I would actually like to show you here and
All
talk
right.
a little bit about.
Let's see. Just yep. Ready for that ring to come up. In the meantime, there, Jenny B. Hey there, stopping by to say hi. Say good to see you, Jenny B. And Oksana Bonita. I'd be getting off that ship as soon as possible too. Totally agree. Yamaha biker Kaiser Pineapple. Based on the title, I initially thought you were Legal Vices, but you're not a weird-looking white Korean. Yeah, well, you know. Yeah. Oh goodness. Oh, good to see a Yamaha biker. Yeah, I say I feel really bad for Jeff right now because he had the trial all day, and then they had it only took 30 minutes for them to get to a verdict in the Shabusiness trial, so he stayed up for that, and then I think he only had he had to close out the stream with only 30 minutes before he had to actually go to work
Oh, man.
after being up all night watching the trial. Hey, Mystic, good to see you. There we go. We're picking up.
There we go. There's that image I wanted to share.
All right.
And let me just put it in.
Let's see. Murph said, "Oh, that's brutal." Yeah. I felt so bad for him. That had to be absolutely just harsh. Hey, Dog Mama. Good to see you. Oh, my.
Oh, hold on.
Been a while since I've seen you in the chat there, Mystic. It's always happy to see you. There we go. And there we go.
So this is the Ambassador.
A handsome-looking ship.
She really is. So she's actually Clipper built originally, as built in 1869. She's built by William Walker and Rothheit. She's 714 gross registered tons, 176 feet long. Her hull is actually composite. This is actually really neat about shipbuilding at this time in 1869, is we're starting to see a lot of iron be incorporated into shipbuilding. So whereas originally your entire skeletal structure was made of wood and thus limiting how long of a ship that you could build, once they started developing and incorporating iron skeletons into shipbuilding, while still the exterior planking being wood, that allowed them to actually start building ships longer. So this is a ship that 50 years previous would not have been possible. So we start seeing these long ships start to develop and operating in the China trade. which of course was in the process of bringing large amounts of tea into Britain for sale.
As you do.
Yes, of course. So Ambassador actually became a huge. It was successful enough for them to make enough money and buy an additional ship later on down the line called the Mikado. Ambassador herself was a mediocre performer in the tea trade run. I think its fastest time was like 98 days from the docks of. I'm trying to remember the name of the port that they actually loaded tea from.
Okay.
But they,
expert.
It's a. I've got it in here somewhere, but anyways, basically they time it from the moment it basically unties from the dock, and then they time it the moment it ties up in London along the Thames.
Okay.
And by that count,
yeah,
it took only 98 days on its quickest run, versus its first time, which it took at 118 days, which was just god awful.
I was going to say, that's a long time to be at sea.
It really is. And in the mid to late 19th, well, even before the mid to late 19th century, it was still a very slow way to go.
Right.
Oops. All right. So after that ship took off, after a few years, they started to accumulate more and more ships until about 1890. When the company decided to really get their first steamships. By this point, the technology was well proven. It was a sound investment. The company was small. It was not nearly the size of the White Star Line or Cunard or anything like that. They weren't running along the transatlantic. Now, the route that they were following was actually going all the way from the United Kingdom. Well, I had a globe somewhere around here. Here we go. Yeah. So the route that we're following here goes all the way from England, gloomy old dreary England, all the way down to the south coast. Oops. All the way down to the southern tip of Africa, and then all the way over. Good grief. To Australia, to Adelaide, to Melbourne, and to Sydney.
It's a hell of a journey right there across.
It quite literally is to the other side of the world that the Blue Anchor Line was operating on. Now, whereas the largest volume of immigrants flowing from Europe were flowing to both Canada and the United States, frankly, there was still a small, profitable, steady stream of both immigrants and first-class passengers, merchants, engineers, people of various walks of life that were traveling to both Australia and New Zealand, and also South Africa, which at that time was a British colony.
And you know what passengers always mean? Say, cha-ching.
Exactly. And so at the time, they got their first set of steamships. And what they did, they didn't build massive ocean liners that you imagine, like the Titanic or the Queen Mary or anything like that. No. There was only a limited number of people going, so they needed to think small. In addition to that, what was a little bit more profitable and actually equally or sometimes more so profitable than transporting people along that long voyage was transporting cargo. And so they started building these, what we would call tramp steamer style ships that could carry a few passengers, but also carried a good amount of cargo.
I've heard the term before. It was just one I didn't know what that meant. So I'm learning along with you.
Yeah. So let me kind of show you here. You can kind of see what I'm talking about.
And yeah, our chat loves to have a little fun, a little wordplay along with everything we say. But this is just how we show that they're. This is how they show that they're engaged. I love this. So experts said, "Yeah, ships are full of seamen. It's the only thing I know." You're not wrong.
You're not wrong. He's right. He's out of line.
I love my chat so much. They're a good bunch of folks. Yeah. if they weren't chatting, we'd know that we were in trouble.
This is true. Let's see here.
Oh my. There we excuse me. Let's see here.
There we go.
All
All
right.
right.
Got it.
So
There we
this
are.
is the Commonwealth. And this is a pretty typical example of what a tramp steamer is. Now, this is maybe a hair on the slightly longer side. I mean, you might see short ones. They come in all shapes and sizes. That's how ships are. But with this particular example, this is where Blue Anchor starts deciding to order their ships from Barclay Curling Company.
Okay.
This is their very first ship from this company. Now, this company was founded in 1818 and has been building ships for a very, very long time. Matter of fact, during the American Civil War, they built as many as 4 blockade runners that, using their high pressure steam, ran the Union blockade and would deliver
Oh
supplies to
wow.
the Confederacy. Yeah. So they
So
definitely in
yeah.
the game of building steamships of high quality.
Okay. I mean, that's actually something that not a lot of folks really know a lot about. To say, but yeah, there was a lot of European and other world nations that were feeding the Confederacy
Oh, absolutely.
stuff, material
Britain
throughout
and
that time.
France were definitely the worst of the two. They're definitely the big ones. In fact, we could almost do a whole video talking about what all they got up to during the American Civil War.
Oh, wow.
But
There are plenty of mysteries from the Civil War I would love to talk about.
we could definitely get into that. But
Anyway,
once the Blue Anchor Line decided to contract with them, they decided to keep it safe and pick a style of vessel that was not too dissimilar from the ones they already had. So they go with this vessel, the Commonwealth.
okay.
It's a very sturdy vessel. It's served out quite an extensive career. Built in 1902, and Barclay Curl, by the way, is actually just outside of Glasgow, Scotland, just to give everyone kind of some perspective as to where we're talking about.
Okay.
The ship is about 6,616 gross registered tons, 450 feet long, 52 feet wide, has 2 propellers, 2 triple expansion steam engines. Those are those big vertical reciprocating things we all have seen in the movie Titanic.
Yeah,
Um,
that was the I was gonna say that's the same type of steam engine the Titanic used.
exactly the same, just on a much, much smaller scale. If
Right. Scaled down.
Oh, much, very much so. And generating, let's see here, about 843 nominal horsepower with a steam pressure of 180 pounds.
Okay.
Ship at a top speed of 13.5 knots. It was an okay, steady, comfortable ship, and that was along the same model that they had followed so far with their previous ships from other companies. So far,
And
so good. They liked the ship. It worked very well. It delivered what they needed, carried 75 first class passengers and 300 third class. That was just the right amount for the trickle of passengers going to and fro.
hard to
Now,
believe that they would make these these large transoceanic, these voyages at only about 15 miles an hour.
yeah, no, it's not fast at all, but it's economical running
Yeah.
at those speeds because it ensures that your consumption of coal can sometimes, depending on the ship, depending on the engines and everything, you could potentially run on only consuming as little as 60, 70 tons of coal per day, which you multiply that up by the fact that you have bunkers carrying thousands, sometimes tons of the stuff. You can go far.
Yeah.
It takes you time, don't get me wrong. Sometimes the ride gets a little bumpy, but usually you get there.
Yeah. This
The
for the
next ship,
time period was pretty advanced though.
very, very.
Mm-hmm.
Now they were very satisfied with the Commonwealth, and so they decided to go forward a couple years down the road in 1904, and decided to order another ship. And I'm getting better at this.
There you go.
This is the SS Geelong. Now, the SS Geelong, built in 1904, again by Barclay and Curle in Glasgow,
Mm-hmm.
this ship they decided to take a step up. Whereas the previous ship was 6,616 gross registered tons, this time they made a jump to 7,954 gross registered tons.
That is a
They
jump.
that is quite a jump. Now it's still 450 feet long and 54 feet 6 inches. However, its depth does increase to 35 feet over the previous depth,
I'm gonna say
which
it
is pretty.
definitely. She definitely looks like she sits a little higher above the water line than the other one that you just showed.
Most definitely, she does. And in fact, in this particular photo, though, she's actually, from what I can discern, carrying a very minimal, if not zero, cargo. And in fact, we
Yeah.
can actually. Can everyone see my mouse pointer?
Yeah, I can see you.
Do you see this line right here?
Barely, but yeah.
Barely,
Let
exactly,
me.
because it's a dark red against a black and white photo, so it's going to be very hard to see. But that's actually the water line right there, and we can follow it all the way forward, all the way to here. Now, when the ship is fully loaded, that mark will be right at, or, and I do mean inches above the water. So this is why, looking at how high it's riding, I can pretty well tell that this has basically no cargo. It might have some passengers on it.
Yeah.
But and it's even in the process of discharging. That's either water from ballast, or alternatively, it could be uh, feed water. But you know, either way, it seems to be very, very light. But yeah, it's a very, very tall-sided ship, regardless.
Yeah.
Um, she also has twin propellers, two triple expansion engines. They're keeping with that same pattern. They have bumped it up a little bit to 803 nominal horsepower. So they definitely are going a little bit faster there, or at least giving a little bit more power, as it were. In addition, we also see it powering up, going up to 200 pounds of steam pressure versus over the 180 of the previous ship.
Uh huh.
Um, and that's really all needed to move that extra depth, that extra cargo space, that extra money making capacity, if you will.
Okay.
Now, this ship now carries 90 first class and 450 third class passengers. So you can kind of see from the numbers of 75 and 180 of the previous, I'm sorry, 75 and 300 of the previous ship, we are starting to see a substantial jump.
Yep.
And from this, they see that there is a way forward in this trade. And that is, in addition to our extensive cargo carrying capacity aboard our ships of very economical size, we need to massively up our passenger carrying capacity. We need a flagship, a ship that will carry the flag of our company from one end of this globe to the other, and that will be on all of our posters and promotional material.
Let
And
me
so,
guess. That's going to be the one we're talking about.
there we go.
So
So,
getting that groundwork definitely laid out so we can go into it. So yeah, that gives us a good baseline for everything that kind of where the story starts on this. So yeah.
exactly. So, as with all my history tellings, there's a reason. There's always a reason why I'm leading you
Yeah.
into in down my tales, so to speak. In here we go. In 1908, so this is about 4 years later, they get the order from Blue Anchor Line to Barclay and Curle. We would like you to take the designs of the Geelong. We love the Geelong, very, very profitable ship, but we want you just to increase it ever so slightly. Just 15 feet longer, a few feet wider, but we want an extra top deck.
You see these numbers? We want these numbers to go higher. We want
Yeah, no, I'm
bigger
not.
numbers.
And they said, all right, we want you to build all this and do all this for us. And the ship has to be even more stable, even though it's taller than and bigger than the Geelong, it has to be more stable than the Geelong. But that's what we also want. In addition, we need you to design in it a special bunker room that can be both a cargo carrying room, a reserve coal carrying room, and also an additional room for us to cram immigrants if we really need to. And I'm not kidding on that.
Somehow, at that period of time, I'm not surprised.
No, most definitely. And let's see here. This will share.
You say Yamaha biker says at the end of that slow trip, you'd find me naked in a corner chewing my toenails and talking to my imaginary friend Fred.
Yeah, no, it's a rough ride for a lot of these immigrants.
Can't say I
Now,
blame you on that one. There
actually,
we go.
sorry,
Okay.
that was the wrong image. These are
And
not laid out in the order I wanted them to be.
I think there was a little communication earlier. So AP was Tramp steamer, Tramp steamer.
Yes.
But, you know.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. All right. Got it.
There we
Launch.
go. So
Yep.
this is Waratah upon her launch there in 1908 from the dockyards of Barclay and Curl in Glasgow. She is 465 feet long. She's 59 feet 5 inches wide, and varying, but thereabouts about a 31 to 30. It's like 31.78 foot draft or height, if you will, of the hull.
Okay.
Now the engines for this, since they decided to add a significant bit of height, as we
have to add some more horsepower, huh?
Exactly. So we added this. They added this whole extra deck in addition to this upper deck house and a raised bridge. So they added a significant amount of weight higher up on the ship than the Geelong was. Just so that way we're all kind of saw the Geelong just before, so we can all kind of see it. This is already a little bit taller than that last ship. Now, she is powered by, instead of triple expansion engines, quadruple expansion engines. So they add yet another stage for the steam to pass through and yet another piston for that steam to press upon and work. And with that, they were able to get a ship that was able to develop 1,003 nominal horsepower, which is quite a substantial jump over both the previous ships.
I was going to say, what was the other one, 800 something? And say that's a substantial jump
the
in
previous
horsepower.
one before that was 700 something, 760 something. But anyways, so yes, so of course that makes sense from an engineering standpoint. Now, with that, it is being powered by only 5 single-ended boilers. Now, these boilers there we go.
Yep, Yamaha says oddly high for how short to me. Oh, don't worry about it, AP. It's all right.
There we go. So the Waratah is outfitted with 5 of these single-ended boilers, each with 4 gratings and openings here for heating. Now, this is basically a giant barrel full of water, if you will, with the hot gases from the fire passing through these little holes, these little tubes, and going through the tank of water and then out the backside, being evacuated up the smokestack after that. Now, with only 5 of those, and yet 215 pounds of steam pressure being developed, they were only able to get a ship that was, again, 13 and a half knots, which was the exact same speed as the Geelong, and oddly enough, the same speed as the Commonwealth. And yet we're now starting to see the company wanting to build a liner, and that doesn't quite ring well with every other company in the world in 1908, which is building liners of equal or greater size, trumping around at 17, 18, 19, 20 knots. And so little Waratah chuffing along at, trying to reach 14 knots on a good day is a little underwhelming.
A little bit, yeah.
Now, with that, the ship was designed to fit within a certain category laid out by Lloyd's of London Registry, which is basically the company that, even back then, even today, basically, if you want your ship insured, you need to consult with them.
Okay.
They are kind of the authority on shipping in the world. And as in 1908, they were the ones consulted multiple times through the staging of design and construction of the Waratah. And every single time they gave it their thumbs up. It checked out okay with them. It always just met those qualifications to the point to where once it was launched, it was given their highest category rating. And yet it was the largest one that had ever fit within the spar deck design, which is a very specific design of ship, which has 3 stages, kind of like what we see with both the Commonwealth and the Geelong, or I guess to a much more massive extent, the Titanic, where you have a raised forecastle in the front, a little raised poop deck in the back, and then a raised structure in the middle. And then you have a spar deck, which is that deck that runs between all of them, kind of dipping along as it goes.
Okay.
So that's kind of the running trait that we'll see over all of these ships. Now, I do want to show you, and this image I think best illustrates the design of the Waratah.
Yep. AP says 1,000 horsepower steamship. Damn, that's some power for the 1900s. Yeah, it was.
It is, though other ships have developed a lot more. The Olympic class liners, Titanic, they were developing. Oh my goodness, flushed all that memory out for war.
It's fine. We're good.
It was several. I think it was about 10. Oh goodness, now I'm gonna kick myself for not remembering the horsepower outage of each of those individual. But it was a lot more. Waratah is pretty small on the
significantly smaller compared to the Titanic.
Most definitely. And I'm actually going to share this one here for you. Cooperates. There we go. This is probably one of my favorite images of the Waratah, honestly, because it was really well designed, really well illustrated, and it perfectly displays Waratah as she would have appeared on her last stop in 1909, but we will get to that. But just to kind of illustrate what this ship looks like, we have a very boxy, raised central structure. It's separated fore and aft by a well deck, kind of like on Titanic. Kind of has this little deck that dips down before we get to the bow, and then a little dip down back here at the stern. We have this poop deck, whereas on Titanic was flat, but on this ship we actually have a structure placed back here, which is entirely for third-class passengers.
Okay.
This entire central structure is entirely dedicated for first-class accommodations and first-class entertainment rooms, if you will.
Okay.
As well as promenades and so forth. Down below, we have the third-class accommodations. And further below that, we have coal bunkerage, which would accommodate this whole central part of the ship, boiler room space, and then the massive engine rooms in this area here. Now, one thing I do want to point out, and I'm sure some of your viewers might very well have been on a cruise ship, might have even been to the seaside and looked out and seen a ship that goes by either on a river or on the open sea, heck, even on the Great Lakes in the open ocean. But typically, the rule of thumb, if you design a ship with the intention of operating in the open ocean, you usually design it, as we've learned over the past few hundred years, with a slightly forward raked bow. Well, flaring out as it goes and widening in order to, well, as the ship dips down in the ocean, increase your buoyancy, increase the amount of upward lift you have.
Okay.
With a ship like Waratah, which is not too uncommon of ship designs of the period, we see this very straight bow. And in fact, I love this view even better. As we can see, it's a very blocky bow. It's of course wedge shaped to allow water to pass, but it doesn't really flare in very far, going from the height of the railing all the way to the waterline. It's relatively flat. This is going to come in later, and this was a certain feature of the ship that Claude Sawyer noted and that, well, kind of alarmed him as he was about to board the ship in Adelaide.
Okay. AP says the steamboats the lumber company my family owned at the time were tiny compared to that ship, but they were beasts traveling through the Great Lakes, apparently. Very cool.
Oh, yes. You have steamships easily. I mean, on the small end, 150, 200 foot. On the big end, easily 800 plus foot going around and carrying massive cargoes. Dangerous cargoes as well that shift, which, interestingly enough, we will get into.
Indeed.
Now, the Waratah was designed to, again, or intentioned to be more stable than the Geelong. And yet, when they actually tested the ship, give me 1 second.
That's fine. Yep.
Never mind.
Okay. Actually, well, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk for a second. I'll be right back.
Okay, excellent. Now, when talking about a ship like the Waratah or any ship, it's very important to talk about some of the aspects of ship stability. Now, I'm not going to get into all the maths and so forth. Even I'm not entirely comfortable with that, but I am just going to show you some very basic things to kind of familiarize everyone to what we're kind of talking about. Let's see here. Okay, I certainly hope that that is sharing. Now, when designing a ship in 1908, as in today, 2023, it's important to consider some important factors. Now, in a ship, there are two forces that you're working against. One is the force of gravity, and that is ultimately the force of gravity pushing down the weight of your giant metal, steel, or wooden ship directly into the water. Now, the other important factor or force in considering ship design is buoyancy. And buoyancy is the upward force that's pushing that ship upward and keeping it in a floating position. Now, ships are almost constantly fighting between gravity and buoyancy and maintaining that buoyancy, or what we would call a neutral buoyancy, wherein it is maintaining its level of the water. Now, a lot of ship designers try to incorporate what we call positive buoyancy into the ship. They try to make the ship just slightly lighter in order to accommodate extra weight, as they know the ship will eventually take on cargo. It might be refitted later in its life with larger, heavier engines. If it's a warship, you could find that in 10, 20 years' time, this warship, which your nation still needs to be outfitted with radar, this new invention that just came in, or anti-aircraft weapons, which were not available 10, 20 years previously. So you have all these additional weights that in a ship's life can be added to the top of it. And so you try to, when you design a ship, you try to kind of design that in as future-proofing the design. Now, looking at this diagram, this displays a few different important points. Now, the first one I'm going to start with is at the bottom. This is called your center of buoyancy. This is basically more or less in the middle of the part of the ship that's under the water. So this is kind of that center point where all the force is acting on it, where even if the ship leans and the shape of the body underwater, the shape of it changes slightly in the water, that center is always going to stay in the geometric center of the ship and no matter what, it will sway and move with the ship.
Hey, Tweety.
The additional force that you're hey, is the image I'm showing by the way?
Yep, I got it up.
Awesome, perfect. Uh, the next major factor or major force that we see here displayed is, well, your center of gravity. That is ultimately the center point that encompasses both the weight of your ship, the cargo that you're potentially carrying, which can cause that center of gravity to shift up and down. Um, and ultimately, those are two of the most important representations in terms of the forces acting upon your vessel. Now, the third important point is it's not a real point on a ship. It's almost a hypothetical imagined point that usually floats above your ship, or at least above the main part of the hull. And this is if you designed your ship really, really well with a substantial amount of positive buoyancy. Now, and I'll show you a diagram in just a second, kind of what that looks like and how they find the metacentric height of a ship, or I'm sorry, the metacenter of a ship. The other and metacenter is being represented by this dot with the letter M in it. Now, the metacentric height, which is the fourth complex term I'm going to introduce here, is basically the distance between your ship's metacenter, which is up here, or supposed to be up here, and your ship's center of gravity, represented here. That's this little red part of the line here is the metacentric height, which can change depending on the load of the ship, depending on any redesigns. These dots can move up and down. Now, your whole goal in a ship design to make a ship as safe and as stable as possible is to keep these two away from each other as much as you can. You want a metacentric height that's a decent enough, that's well enough, high enough, but not too high in your ship's design calculation, but you want your center of gravity to be nice and low. And this distance between the two creates what's called a moment of rotation, kind of a twisting moment, where when the ship is over in this kind of a position, the forces want to bring the metacenter and the center of gravity back in alignment. So it creates a twisting moment. In this moment, while the ship is leaned over to what would be, well, if we're looking at it from head on, would be its left side or port side, it's essentially creating what in our view would be a counterclockwise rotational force, trying to force this back into alignment. And the longer, or I should, well, yes, the longer that metacentric height, or the greater that metacentric height is, the more force of stability, if you will, your ship's going to have, and the more riding force it has. So when it encounters these rough waves and rough storms at sea, rather than leaning and having very little force, if these two imagined dots are very close together or are, and in fact, even on opposite sides of each other, which you really don't want, you have very minimal twisting force trying to bring the ship back upright into alignment.
Oh, so kind of like, so just the basic principle of gravity, like the force exerted one direction, it tries to pull it back the other way.
Exactly. It tries to bring itself back on that center keel. And that's, so that's the whole goal of a naval architect ultimately when they're designing a ship, is to design a ship that's extremely stable. Now, here's the catch-22. An extremely stable ship, and I don't know if anyone has been on a ship that is designed to be extremely stable, which if you've been on a cruise ship, that's not one. But if you've ever been on a very stable ship in a storm, you will get tossed and thrown about like you're on the bridge of the USS Enterprise. Like you are not keeping your seat or your position because you are literally fighting the ship, trying to fight the sea as it's throwing you about inside, trying to constantly keep upright. Whereas if you have passengers, a lot of paying people, and you don't want a lot of people to go home and contact lawyers and so forth and start suing your ass, you want to make sure you design a ship that has a slightly slower, more comfortable roll.
Okay.
So, you might design your ship to be a little, maybe just a tiny bit top heavy. Maybe your center of gravity you design to be a little bit higher, just so that metacentric height is far enough apart to be safe, but enough to where the ship is just kind of gently rolling back
It just
and
kind of
forth.
softens that swing back and forth instead of making it snap back to where it's supposed to go.
Exactly. So that way everyone kind of slowly walks like they're a little drunk on their way back to their stateroom or something, rather than being thrown about, head smashed into the hallway or the wall or bulkhead or whatever.
Kind of reminds me, because I've seen like YouTube videos of like, like ships at sea during storms, like cargo ships. And I mean, you watch some of these guys and like,
Oh yes.
they're just getting tossed.
And
But
if you
then, yeah,
look
you
at
see
those,
like a cruise ship and they're like in heavy seas, and it's just like, yeah, a little bit of this
yep,
here or
it's
there.
kind of going this way and that. But a cargo ship is always trying to keep itself upright. Cargo ships are very well designed. And in fact, again, talking about the bows of modern ships, again, cruise ships and modern cargo ships, if you ever immediately right now go to Google image search and look at that, you'll see their bows are nice and flared. They come out and up and away from the sea. So that way, when it dips down, you're literally adding more hull physically in the water and adding more buoyant force, thus giving you the upward thrust to throw yourself back up over that wave. That's how you design
Oh.
a really good ship.
See, this is why I like to have you, to discuss this stuff, because you actually get into the design aspects and like really break it down, and
It's
you break
important.
it down in ways that actually you can understand.
I try
So,
to. Thank you.
real quick, there's wanted to say hi to the White Rabbit. Good to see you. And Tweety U.S. News, how you doing? Say, this is how mathematics should be taught in school. Trigonometry
And the
plus
truth
physics.
is, I struggled in math and high school math. I really did. Algebra and so forth. I genuinely struggled. Geometry, apparently, I was a whiz at. But I'm not the best at math. But these principles and concepts, it's strange because I guess I've always, because of my love of ships and my study of ships and my passion and interest in how they work, that all kind of made perfect sense to me. So everything kind of fell into line. Like, oh yeah, duh, of course, that's where that's why
Absolutely.
that's the meta center. That's why it's there. That's why buoyancy is so important. Why maintaining positive buoyancy, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about here in just a
Okay.
second.
Real quick, let me go ahead and hit this AP. So the Coast Guard ship that can roll over and right itself without capsizing, or so not the Coast Guard ship. Okay.
So that's actually a ship, and that's really really cool. It's a really neat design. So it actually basically, because of the way that ships like that can flood ballast tanks, they're basically designed with that metacenter and that center of gravity really freaking close together as it is. So that way, all they have to do. Sorry, I realize I'm cameras up here.
Yeah.
Whatever. God. There we go. So you basically have those 2 points just above each other, and what you want them to have, you basically on a ship like that want them to be very, very close. So that way, with just adding a little bit of water ballast or something like that, you can move that center of gravity above that metacenter, which now makes your ship really unstable. Which is the point of some ships, is designed to go on its side and so forth. That's how you do that. You basically give yourself neutral, absolutely pure neutral buoyancy, and then in one particular place. So you can flood one side of the ship or the other. It depends on the ship design. And some of them I've seen with flood tanks at the rear, so they go upright or however you design it. But you basically move those 2 points ever so slightly and change your buoyancy from, in some cases, slightly neutral to negative, thus sinking technically. But then, of course, you have the ability to pump that water out and get back to a positive buoyant state.
Gotcha.
Or how submarines work, for instance. They go back and forth between positive, neutral, and negative buoyancy all the time. That's how they operate.
And
So.
Texas Jen, how you doing there? Good to see you. Say Yamaha Biker says, I only did transport ship long enough to leave it in an LCAC. There you go. I totally get
Went
it.
out of there in style, eh?
AP, it's a badass machine, or say it's a badass machine in all honesty. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to show one other thing, or kind of give everyone a point of view as to kind of how they find the meta center of a ship.
Okay.
So you take your brand newly built ship, no cargo or anything like that aboard. You might have, well, depends, but you might have some fuel, you might have some water, and so forth. But you want to try to get the ship as near enough to empty as possible, and you have a
Okay.
skeleton crew on board, and you want to basically flip the ship slightly. You put it in an area of your dockyard where it's just dead still flat water, not a ripple of wind, nothing. And what you do is you start flooding your tanks and you start tipping your ship over to the side. And you take a series of measurements using weights and so forth. And engineers are able to find work out exactly where that little metacenter is above the ship. So they just kind of go through exact angles of roll with each time taking exact measurements. And they can get the ship over pretty damn far. Like, not, this is kind of an extreme example here, but they can get the ship pretty well over to something like this. So they this is what they do to find that metacenter, and they'll go back and forth. They'll use those numbers and figures to work it all out, and they get right within a very close percentile where that metacenter is, and so that they know we're going forward how to work with that effectively.
Okay. And real quick there, Jenny B says, I'm not sure if Legal Vice has ever covered the ship. The story is fascinating. As far as I know, Jeff hasn't covered this one, so I'm kind of getting in early.
Oh, with me, I can probably get you in early on all manner of things, mate.
Oh, I'm sure.
Now,
I'm sure I'm gonna get an earful from Jeff on this one, but you know, hey, he had Shabidness to go take care of.
as we all do from time to time.
And real quick there, Tweety, I will actually go ahead and I will save your comment there. We're going to do a Q&A closer toward the end of the show. So yeah, any questions you got for my guest here, he'll be happy to answer for you. And yeah, feel free to drop them. I'll mark any that come in, and we'll cover those at the Q&A section. Absolutely.
So just to give everyone kind of a caveat on that, I basically studied maritime and naval history since I became passionate about it at the age of 5. But my special areas of study, I go from about the mid 15th century, so mid to late 15th century, so about 1450 to 1490, if you will, on forward to just post Second World War. I call it about 48 to 50 is where I kind of cut off, 1948, 1950. But it still gives me about 500 years worth of maritime naval history to dive into, which is still, as I'm sure many will agree, quite a lot.
That's a significant chunk.
That being said, and with all the years I have, and mind you, that's all of my free time. That is between, study hall in high school and riding home on the bus in middle school and elementary. This is all my free time of just reading about this stuff and just slowly accumulating it. If I can't answer it, I will honestly tell you I can't. If I know where we can find that answer, and if we have time to, we can find it together. But
all right.
But just kind of keep that in mind. Any sort of questions that fall within that time range, anything about sailing ships, steamships.
Yep.
Feel free.
And
fire away. Warships, naval, merchant ships, passenger liners.
The great thing about StreamYard is that it allows me to actually mark specific chats that come in, and I can save those, and I can just pull them up later and just.
Awesome.
So I don't have to lose it.
So
all right.
I do want to get us back on track just a little bit here.
Sure.
I do have one more thing I want to talk about regarding ship stability, and that is buoyancy. Now, you've heard me throw around this word a lot. And
you want to enlarge that a little bit there?
Oh, yes, of course. Reserve buoyancy. Now, the buoyancy of your ship, and in fact, specifically the reserve buoyancy, basically the amount of backup buoyancy your ship has if you start to sink and start taking on water, it is directly related to the freeboard of your ship. Now, what freeboard is effectively the measurement and the distance between where your ship touches the water and the topmost part of the enclosed hull of your ship. So see all this superstructure up here, we completely ignore. That is not watertight structure. That's not a part of the hull. So that has no regard at all when you consider the buoyancy of your ship. It may as well not be there for this. So with this regard, we see ships throughout history that have high freeboard and thus a very large amount of reserve buoyancy. Oddly enough, like Titanic and her sisters, those had very high freeboard and a massive amount of reserve buoyancy. Truly, the fact that 2 out of 3 sank is honestly, when you really look at it, kind of impressive. But because they genuinely were for their time very well designed ships. We also see ships. Good to say that 10 times fast. See ships with a very low freeboard as well. Ships like during the American Civil War. We have the ironclad USS Monitor being built, that low cheese box on a raft with a single rotating turret with 2 massive 11-inch Dahlgren cannons poking out. You know, it had a freeboard of mere inches. And of course, naturally, when it was towed out in open ocean off the Carolinas, it sank in rough weather. So it just makes sense. You put something with very low freeboard and very low reserve buoyancy out into open ocean, and you were just asking for trouble. So a little rule for everyone to live by. Now, with that, I do want to move on to start talking about the ship's maiden voyage, because the ship did not run into trouble on its first voyage, unlike Titanic or some other ships we can point to in history.
Mm-hmm.
Its
This
first
was not
voyage,
a maiden voyage sinking.
no, by no means, no means. But the maiden voyage nonetheless had its hiccups. For starters, at the outset, it was very clear that the Blue Star Line and, in fact, Barclay Curl gave very little thought and consideration into the accommodations of the immigrants. Because while the Waratah had the ability to carry 100 first class passengers and 300 third class passengers, it also had these special cargo holds that could be modified to carry up to 750 immigrants. And basically dormitory style accommodation where you just have racks. Like if you've ever seen or ever been aboard a World War II ship, either an aircraft carrier, a battleship, a destroyer, a cruiser, and you see the crew decks where everyone sleeps, or if you even serve in the Navy, you might have seen something, a more modern version of this, where you just have a room of just racks on top of racks on top of racks on top of racks. And you're sharing that rack, of course, with someone else in the Navy. But with this, you've got your own bunk, but you're also in this open room with how many hundreds of other people? Everyone kind of snoring, getting sick, living it out in the dark, dank depths of this steamship being tossed around for about 4 months on your trip to Australia.
Let me call my travel agent.
Yeah. It was a very long, at 13 and a half knots, it took just a hair under 4 months for the Waratah to make the long voyage from the docks, from the UK all the way down to your final destination in Sydney, Australia. So, just to give everyone an idea as to what that, and imagine what that might be like with the heat of everyone else's breath, minimal ventilation, just not very comfortable. But
no, I can't imagine.
For first class, however, the voyage on the Waratah 4 months, it wasn't half bad. I'm going to share with you now, quite literally, the only photo that we have in existence of the inside of the Waratah.
Not yet, Yamaha Biker, or sorry, Murph. Say we will definitely get to that.
So I did say in the dream part, if you joined us earlier, I told the dream of a certain individual. And I mentioned that there were 213 passengers and crew on board. But that is not how many were on board when the ship actually disappeared. So we'll get to that.
Okay.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is the first class music room on board the Waratah.
My.
Later on, when we go back to showing an exterior photo of the Waratah, if you look at the deck right below the boat deck, that's the deck where all the lifeboats are up top. If you look at the windows on the forward end, that is quite literally these windows that look out to the forward, towards the bow and the forward well deck of the ship. These windows look off to the right or starboard side. And looking down in this well, which is nicely lit by this domed glass dome overhead, which also, I believe, also probably had some sort of inset lighting to provide illumination during the nighttime, pretty common for liners of this period. You have this open well that looks down nicely into the dining room. So if you also look, whenever I show you later the exterior forward shot of the ship, you'll see a big bulky room down below that has all these windows, big round portholes all along the sides, and that's the first class dining room. So you kind of have this really nice entertainment and relaxing area on the forward end of the Waratah. And
Okay.
and unfortunately, and it's sad because of how short of a life the ship had, and how it was not one of the big transatlantic liners like Olympic or Titanic or Lusitania that literally from day one was getting hundreds, if not thousands, of photos taken of it. This big, enormous, fascinating new liner that's the biggest thing in the world. Of course, it always gets the limelight. Same 100 years ago as it is today, really.
Yep.
Now, on this maiden voyage, the Waratah ran into some issues. And one of the problems with the design of the ship, and it seems one of the first signs that the builders might have been cutting the corners just a little bit to keep under budget, because quite frankly, the contract said they were only getting 139,900 pounds for the job, so they had to get it done for that amount. So they missed certain things, such as not insulating the coal bunker from the engine room, or from the boiler room, I should say, not providing insulation for those two surfaces, and just having a thin, I think, it's like 3/4. It's like a very thin, basically, sheet of steel that functioned as a separator between the bulkhead and the rest of the room. Basically, that functioning. And the back end of 3 boilers being right up against that, I might add. In addition, there were steam pipes and various different valves that ran back there along that wall that were not insulated themselves. So you have a massive spot where a lot of heat is passing by the coal bunker. Now, if anyone remembers,
yeah, sounds like you're trying to tell me that things got a little heated.
well, that's the thing, is that it did. And as anyone remembers from our video 3 months ago, the dangers that can happen on a coal bunker whenever it's heated. Now, coal doesn't just suddenly fire. It doesn't just explode violently. It's a little bit different. And in fact, what usually happens is you have, under high heat, and especially under sometimes moist heat, coal starts to emit certain gases that are perfectly flammable. And the longer you keep it in that kind of a dank, warm environment, the more of those gases are going to build up. Now, those gases can quickly, especially when in the case of an introduction of flame with oxygen, can suddenly, spontaneously explode, or under lower heat and with a little bit of friction, can start a smoldering fire. Which, yes.
For anybody that's ever started a fire in like a charcoal chimney, you put one lit coal at the bottom, and that thing, as they all catch,
it's a very unique chemical reaction that only happens under very specific circumstances. But because of those specific circumstances, it was a common enough occurrence on steamships. So it was something that engineering crews, firemen, stokers, every officer, everyone had to be aware of and alert of. It was, as in the days of sail, fire aboard ship. You have to be careful and mindful of it and vigilant. Now, this did become a problem for the Waratah on its maiden voyage. It was in December of 1908 it experienced a fire in the boiler room as a result, more than likely, of the thin separating wall between the bulkhead wall of the coal bunker and the boiler room. There was a just a quick, like it's not a kind of, it's not like hitting a mine or something. It's not like a bunch of TNT going off or something like that. It's not going to rip open the hull, but people were injured in the flash. Pipes were damaged, and the area in general was scorched. And so once the ship arrived safely in port, they had to basically sit there for about 7 weeks as repairs were implemented and as they investigated further the problems of the ship. Now, when the ship did make it back to England, the captain apparently was quick to report that he was not entirely impressed with the Waratah, and commented that her stability is not like the Geelong, which Captain Ilbury had previously commanded for several years. So this, for him, should have been an easy. It should have been like Captain Smith of the Titanic, who had commanded Olympic for a number of years, and now he's just getting another version of it. Except in the Geelong versus Waratah case, it's just a deck higher. It's just a little bit taller and a little bit bigger, but it's overall the same general design. And so he was very unimpressed between the ship's instability, we'll call it that, and the performance of the performance of the ship in general. The speed, the characteristics of handling in the oceans, which was not helped by the ship's metacentric height. Now, if you remember, I talked just a little bit ago about the importance of keeping that your metacenter above your center of gravity and keeping it a good distance above. Well, the metacentric height of the Waratah, upon completion and the initiation of her maiden voyage, was a whopping 4.5 inches.
I'm sorry, what?
How much distance was between those two opposing those two forces? So the ship, rather than rotating like this around a center point, an invisible little center point up here, finds that center point much lower down to where. Sorry, this is a perfect opportunity for me to use my whiteboard here.
All right.
Sorry, everybody. I feel like a teacher in the classroom.
You all good?
Now, all the students be quiet whilst I color on the wall for a moment.
Really quick there, hit a couple of these chats. So, yep. Say Yamaha Biker says, same with underground coal fires. There's some that have been burning for decades.
Exactly.
Yep. And
when you go
Centralia,
warmer temperatures, and of course you get this damp environment where those gases can start to percolate. So yes, absolutely, same environment. Coal mines and ships, those are really the two places where you will see coal fires and explosions and so forth like that.
AP, gotta love perfect air fuel mixtures when you aren't even trying. Yep.
Exactly. It's steam, and it's funny, and between that and the fact that steam engines, when you really think about them, are effectively, well, boilers anyways, are bombs on, well, bombs effectively. If you don't keep water over that crown sheet, you're all dead. Or if you poke a big hole in the side of that boiler suddenly, you're also all dead.
Yeah, we found that out on the oh gosh, what was that one? The Sultana.
Oh yes.
And Tweety says, this is about the Waratah that was built in 1908. Yes, that is the boat we are talking about today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Yamaha, you know what I'm talking about.
All right, so as I've shown you before, so you've got your 3 dots, you got your center of buoyancy at the bottom in here in blue, where all that water force is pushing in. You've got your center of gravity here, which is kind of the center point there, so to speak. Of now, with Waratah's case, whereas you would normally want that center of gravity to be a little bit lower, Waratah, especially when she was fully loaded with cargo, that center of gravity went up, as with any ship. If you put a lot of, well,
Downward force.
when you put it, well, I'm sorry, it's not. There were some cargo, and I'll get into that. There was some cargo that was stored at a slightly higher elevation in the ship than some of the other cargo holds. But you also have the problem of the additional top decks, which ultimately is not helping that center of gravity, as it does fluctuate up and down depending on where you put that weight. Now, the meta center, which normally would be nice and high, and we have this nice little distance between the two, we now basically have them where there's something like this, and where they're effectively, instead of having this big nice arm of action, if you will, that big twisting motion, you basically have very little force on the ship, to where what it's going to do, and what it did, was tend to lean over to one side, either because the wind or just that's the way it leaned that day, and it would stay there for hours and hours until either the wind or a change in direction of the ship, or even a sea state, rolled the ship back over in the other direction, and it would just keep kind of riding like that for a good long while. And that was what effectively worried a lot of the Waratah's passengers, both on her first and final voyage, is that they noticed, well, this ship does have a slow roll like the big transatlantic liners, the safe ships, yet it's just staying on its side. It's just kind of staying there. It's not trying to get itself upright. And then the very first storms that they encountered, which was off the southern coast of Australia during that first voyage, they noticed she wasn't really riding over any of the waves. She was just kind of plowing right through them, one after the next. Well,
you see, folks, in the business, this is what we call foreshadowing.
And the truth of the matter is, and I don't want to paint Waratah as being the only ship like this.
Oh, yeah.
In all of my research and studying of ships of the late 19th and early 20th century, I have encountered countless different ships that are top heavy and overweight, both like visually, just looking at it, you can see it. And also when you actually like look at the numbers and you actually look at its plans, it's like, okay, this is a questionable choice. And usually engineers try to compensate for that by somehow incorporating heavy design of ballast or weight down below in the ship to try to compensate it. But a top heavy looking ship is more than likely, if it looks top heavy, it's probably top heavy. If your structure, if your big structure, superstructure sits higher than, as high or higher than the height of the hull of the ship, so your freeboard, the thing that's giving you that extra buoyancy that will keep you up in a storm, it's ridiculous. It's a terrible design. It looks, not only does it look awkward, it also performs in a very awkward manner, as many of the crew and officers would attest. In fact, on its first voyage, when they were offloading cargo in Adelaide, they immediately found that the ship became unstably light. Like they basically had to keep some cargo on the ship, which jives with what was actually reported by the builders, because they recommended that if you take this ship into open ocean with full water and coal bunkerage capacity, fully filled, you have to carry a minimum of 1,200 tons of cargo.
Oh, wow.
You have to be carrying that just to keep your ship upright. So that should alarm everyone here, that they literally have designed a ship which, in order to sail safely, has to be carrying heavy weight in the form of cargo down below. If it's fully fueled up with cargo or with coal enough to go to the other side of the world or on a long oceanic voyage, and having also the water to accommodate those passengers.
From a business standpoint, it's kind of like, well, I want, cargo on the ship anyway.
Yeah, it should basically
So
make sure that it always has to have that. Like it's, and
yep,
if you
real
don't, you can't
yeah.
sail that ship, at least not safely.
Let me hit a couple of quick chats here that came through. So Yamaha Biker mentioned, yep, the Sultana says those poor guys that survived Andersonville and other camps. Fortunately, my great plus uncle wasn't on it. Yeah, that's good to say.
Hopefully, you took one of
Um,
the other boats home from there because there were plenty. And the truth is,
yeah,
those captains they were getting paid a good amount of money
I think it
for
was
the
like
time.
$10 a head at the
Ahead,
time.
yeah, ahead. So they're like, yeah, standing room only, cram aboard. They probably had some guys standing around the engine room, like, hey man, you want to shovel some coal? You
Yeah.
want to help out?
American Steve, any pressure chamber is essentially an explosive under the right conditions. Yep.
Absolutely.
And Tweety says, love this. So apparently we're doing something right.
I like to think so. I definitely like to think so. Oh goodness, my coffee's getting cold. Well,
That's why I went to iced tea. Iced tea doesn't get warm, it just gets room temperature.
let's
And
see
Yamaha
here.
Biker says, yeah, it was packed. I agree. I think they said they lost like 2,500 on the Sultana.
Would you? Uh, Something like yes, it was something like that. Very very close to that. It was some extensive. It was in terms of peacetime because it was
Post Civil War.
post war, post bellum. It was until the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustav at the end of the Second World War. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. Technically, that happened during the very final days of I believe April of 45. So technically speaking, that's a wartime loss. So in terms of peacetime loss, yes, Sultana, to my memory, is the largest loss of life.
Hmm. All right.
Now,
Slight detour, sorry.
no. I like this. This is great. I don't mind this one bit. So with the maiden voyage having concluded and having made a fairly profitable venture, um, even accounting the damages incurred, the time spent in dockyard tied up, getting both mechanical repairs and also in terms of uh, the charring, a little bit of aesthetic cleanup there as well. But after about 7 weeks, the ship was ready to depart on its second voyage. And on this voyage, she again loaded up with a reasonably large number of third class passengers, immigrants, as well as first class, as well as a very minimal cargo, just basically enough to right the ship, more or less. And the ship left in, let's see here. Apparently, I didn't jot down when exactly it departed on its second voyage. My goodness. But
I mean, you've done extremely well so far. I think we can
it is
forgive
developing
like
from my
one little
memory,
hiccup.
so I appreciate that. Um, da, 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 da.
I say, guys, if you haven't already noticed, whenever we talked about setting this one up, he was like, I'm going to make sure that like I have everything ready to go for this one. And I mean,
I try.
this guy.
I still don't. I cram too much up here, and I try to rely on just memory. Thank you so much.
Oh, man.
All right. Oh. Give me one moment, folks.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, Tweety did go ahead and confirm there. Sultana was carrying 2,130 passengers, according to Wiki.
Okay, 2,100.
Yep.
Okay.
Which
I knew it's like two something. It was like a very large number. But
yeah,
I have literally, I have read so many numbers. It all just, at a certain point, it starts to become a blur. And you really try to struggle to remember the exact details. Stories we need to remember, which is probably why we have so many stories and mythology and legend and so forth, is that the stories get told, but the details, they're the things that get lost. rant over.
Yep. Real quick there.
So,
American Steve says, I don't believe anyone who says they have everything packed and ready to go and never forget something before leaving. Truth.
that, and also never trust anyone who says that they have all the answers and they know everything. They're full of shit. Or,
Ironically, most of the time I hear people say that they're in government.
yeah. And it's, oh no, I just closed the tab I just opened. I'm having a time here.
It's all right. We're doing really good. We're cruising.
There we go. So April 27th, 1909, Waratah departs on her second voyage to Australia. And I'm just going to read this out loud here. She is carrying 22 first-class passengers, 193 steerage passengers, and in addition to a large cargo of general merchandise, with a crew of 119 on board. Now, the crew complement at maximum is 154, but for this second voyage, what's interesting is a number of those crew have decided not to sail with the Waratah. So it almost makes you wonder, why did, I mean, that's 154 down to 119. It's like 40 some odd, guy or 30, 40 guys that decided to just, we don't.
Yeah, peace out.
We don't want this job. We don't want this job anymore. We're gonna off, which is not uncommon. Groups of men deciding to jump ship for better pay, something like that. But at the same time, it again makes me wonder if they experienced the Waratah and felt that maybe it wasn't the safest and best designed ship. But with that, the outbound trip, it was entirely uneventful on that second fateful voyage. Nothing really out of the ordinary happened. She arrived, she made her usual route, which basically, again, went from London all the way down to Cape Town, Africa, just to hop over the other side of South Africa to Durban, and then a run right across the South Indian Ocean all the way over to Adelaide, which I kind of want to give everyone kind of an idea as to what I'm talking about, because I know everyone hasn't stared at a map or a globe, probably to quite the extent I have, but I want everyone to kind of get a visual as to where we are kind of talking about.
And this is April of 1909, correct?
That's correct. The voyage goes from April of 1909 to, July of 1909 when it ends.
Abruptly.
Yes, very abruptly. And here we go.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. So here is Australia. Welcome,
quite familiar with that. Hey, I could see Ozzy's house from here.
Right, yeah. So you come in. So basically, as the Waratah, or really any ship of the Blue Anchor Line, steams in from across from Durban, South Africa, they'll be coming in about on this track, making directly for Adelaide, which is their very first stop here. It's a pretty significant major city along the Victoria, New South Wales coast. And then we sail south for our next stop to Melbourne. And then after that stop, of letting off just a few passengers, because, not everyone's bound for the very final destination of Sydney, Australia. I'm sure we're all familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the voyage loops back on itself, back to Melbourne, and again back to Adelaide, and onward we go. Now, in Sydney, she does take on quite an extensive bit of cargo of general merchandise and so forth that's going to be brought back to the UK. A number, in fact, what was described in the press as bullion, which the first thing I guess that some of these journalists thought when they heard the word bullion or saw the word bullion was gold. And so they immediately started this story that even persists in, some of the tabloidish stuff you'll see online about the Waratah, that it was carrying like 300 bars of gold. And it just was not.
Well, I mean,
I know it would add to this mystery and make it seem so much more interesting, but truly, if anyone has heard that, it's not true. It's just not.
Well, I
So
mean,
what?
just one more reason to go look for the ship.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. But no. Now, bullion is basically just a word that's used basically to describe the forming of a metal into a specific shape, usually in the form of either an ingot, like a bullion ingot, or coins, or some other form like that. But typically, you have these bars, if you will,
Sure.
and you can make all sorts of material into this. It's a very convenient shape to both store the material for later use, to transport it. You can have copper, silver, aluminum, titanium, steel, or in the case of Waratah, she loaded ingots of iron bullion. Basically,
Ah,
very processed, ready for the industries of the UK, ready to be shipped up there, that had been freshly mined and processed, if you will, in Australia. So that's actually what its one of its heavier cargoes was, in addition to a bunch of general merchandise and so forth. Now, the ship made its way back over to Melbourne, then to Adelaide. Well, at Adelaide is where it takes on its final bit of passengers and its final cargo. And this is a very important cargo because it takes on about 1,000 tons of this stuff. Let me show you.
oof.
Here we go.
There we go. Yamaha Biker says, "Well, when you live in a place where everything wants to, wants to, or will end you, it can make you weird. Hence, Aussie Overlord." Yep.
Yes.
Uh,
So this stuff is lead ore concentrate. This stuff can be found in various mining operations and so forth all around the world. It looks like very, very fine worked gravel, but in fact, this is lead, and it is a favorite cargo of steamship captains. And the reason being is that because it's very fine. It's almost like a liquid, if you will. You can pretty well pour it into any size cargo hold in order to both provide a payable cargo to transport somewhere else, but also a very heavy one, and one
yeah.
that will perfectly take up the bottom of your cargo hold. Now, this ship took on about 1,000 tons of this stuff. Now, the problem with it is that it, much like the material loaded onto the USS Cyclops, as well as the material load onto the Edmund Fitzgerald, has a tendency to shift, and especially in rough weather, take on a liquid like almost like a liquid viscosity, if you will, in the way that it moves around freely. And suddenly you have this cargo that's experiencing a free surface effect, that's just leaning over to one side of the cargo hold or the other as the ship is rocked from side to side, sending the majority of that 1,000 tons of weight off to one side or the other. So I just want to kind of get everyone into that visual in their head of seeing all this sand-like material, this very fine gravel-like material, just moving about in this cargo hold as it pleases.
Yeah, that given kind of what we've already talked about, sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It absolutely is, and it has been for many a ship. As both of those ships, other ships I listed, as we know, they're not
Yep,
around anymore.
the Cyclops and the Fitzgerald. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So this ship. Oh, I'm so sorry. Were you about to say something?
No, you're good.
Okay. So the ship takes on this final cargo and the last of her passengers. Now, this one particularly interesting passenger that boards in Adelaide with a ticket for passage all the way to Cape Town, with the option of carrying on to London because he is living in the UK, though he has business in Cape Town. So that's ultimately his immediate destination. Decides to book on the Waratah, seeing that it's, so far as all the ships he sees lined up in Adelaide, the largest and most well accommodated one. So he books his passage and hoping for a very nice, pleasant voyage. But the entire time he starts noticing problems. Immediately is alarmed by that roll of the ship and its unique personality, its unique tendency to lean on one side and stay that way and lean the other way. He's been on many ships. He travels. This gentleman is Claude Gustave Sawyer, and he's a Swiss-born engineer. He's a civil engineer, and he spent a good amount of time traveling on ships. And because of his background, he has kind of an understanding, at least, of kind of how a ship should work and should kind of function. I mean, he's not a naval architect, but knows a little bit. And he's at least well traveled enough to know what a stable, upright ship that's fighting the storms and actively trying to ride over the waves, what that's supposed to look and feel like. And he's immediately alarmed by this ship. And it's low freeboard. It's very low freeboard. It's towering superstructure, making it look top heavy. And throughout the voyage, he just can't shake this feeling about the ship. And in fact, one day he's actually taking a bath, and this is a little bit misreported. Now, in one instance, he says it's reported that the ship went through between its roll from one side to the other, went through a 45-degree angle, which is very, very, very significant. And because that's such a significant angle when you really look at it, enough so that where everyone else on board the ship should have been going, what the hell is wrong with this ship? It shouldn't have been just one or two people, just this one guy and a few of the crew that got off on its last trip back to the UK, thinking that there's something off about this ship. So with that, he starts to get this gnawing feeling that between all of his observations, he needs to get off the ship and find some other way. And in fact, he starts having that dream, the very dream that I described in the beginning. And he has that reoccurring night after night. And it has him so frazzled that he starts talking to some of the other passengers on board and even trying to convince a couple of them to try to get off the ship in Durban with him, that he just did not feel this ship was very safe at all. And he got his chance to kind of get a real feel for the ship, where on its way into Durban, it did go through some rough weather. And he was watching the ship from the hurricane deck, which, let me show you guys kind of where that is.
Okay, while you're pulling that up, I'm going to go ahead and hit a couple of these here.
Yeah.
D. What? Good to see you. Say thanks for joining in, and thank you also to joining us, Mamasaurus Rex. Good to see you. And our good friend Valhalla awaits. Hey, buddy. Good to see you. Great to have you in the chat. So, all right. AP says, yeah, 45 degrees and people weren't having a panic attack. I mean, okay, folks, for context, this up here, this is 90 degrees. Here's 45 degrees.
Now, it's described as going through that roll. So is it like maybe 20 degrees one side, then 25 degrees the other side? Or is it somewhere in the middle there?
Right.
But it's not very clearly reported, at least in that source. In other sources I've read, it's described that the ship goes between a 4 to 5 degree list to port and starboard, which, in my opinion, now mind you, I'm not a naval architect. I'm just a guy who spent the majority of his life studying this through various books, media, scholastic articles, and just picking up everything that I can from people, from even some people who have specialized in certain subjects. But
Right.
in my opinion, a 4 to 5 degree angle seems, and listing that much back and forth seems a lot more plausible. Where everyone else is thinking, "Oh, this is normal, this is comfortable, like this isn't that bad. Like, what are you talking about?" Whereas he is like, "This isn't. This is not quite how a ship's supposed to function. It's not supposed to do this." And in fact, in a second, after I show you where he's standing making this observation, I'd like to show everyone really quick. I'd like to take everyone forward in time to 1913, to the year after Titanic, to see the next biggest ship in the world, and we'll all kind of get get a view of what a big ocean liner looks like that suffers some stability issues.
Okay.
Now, again, back to this wonderful image of the Waratah here. Now, a hurricane deck on any ship, it doesn't matter if we're talking about a Mississippi riverboat, it doesn't matter if we're talking about a sailing ship, it doesn't matter if we're talking about a spar-decked steamship like the Waratah. The hurricane deck is going to be the highest possible deck where you as a passenger can get up to. Now, in this case, this is this railed off raised platform deck structure right above the this is actually an enclosed stairwell back here, as well as, I believe, a small, perhaps a small lounge of some kind, just a small kind of foyer sitting area.
Okay.
That's fully enclosed under there. But this raised railinged structure, raised deck, is the hurricane deck. And from
Right.
here, from his vantage point, he was looking forward just a hair under the bridge to these massive waves that would crash over the bow of the ship. And rather than the ship riding up to meet that wave, as near every other ship he's ever traveled on, it is just punching it like a fist straight through it. And the thing is that if you follow my mouse cursor, it's taking that water directly over the bow, and that's spilling down onto this well deck, this kind of lower down deck here.
Yep.
Now, if you see these three little places here, 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 and here, these are called scuppers. They're doors, hinged doors in the side of the ship that lay sideways that allow water to flow out of there. Now, it only allows, with three on either side, it only allows water to flow out at a certain rate. And the problem is that sometimes not all the water drains before the next big wave comes crashing over.
So you end up with a heavier amount of water on deck than that weighs it down.
Exactly, and weighs it down well above the water line, I might add. So you have an estimate of anywhere from 250, 300 tons of excess seawater just sitting up here, and potentially even back here on this aft well deck if you have side rollers coming in and spilling water, or even if you're taking water over the stern. This will also catch that water, though it will try to slowly drain that off through those scuppers.
Yeah, AP says 45 degrees is enough to give you a pucker factor on solid ground. Now add water with waves and F that.
Exactly, which is why I'm like, I don't believe it went through quite that significant of a list, because everyone else would be wanting to get off in Durban. I think a lot more than just 2 people would have gotten off at the ship's next port of call if that was really the case. So, with that, I do want to take y'all forward just a little bit and kind of show you guys what, I know not everyone has quite looked at the extensive number of ships as myself and probably some others, but there is a ship that was built by the Hamburg America line, which is a German company that was formed in the 1880s. And they were kind of a big rival to the big British companies, the White Star, the Cunard line, the Inman line, and so forth. And so they, of course, built big passenger liners. In fact, the very first ocean liner to ever be built with 4 smokestacks, 4 funnels, was a German ocean liner, the Kaiser Wilhelm der Große. and they kind of went from there. They basically copied that design for some more four-funneled liners, and they loved the design. And Britain went, "Hey, ooh, we need some of those too." And then, of course, they built their own, and that's a whole other story. But with regard to Germany's construction programs for ocean liners, the first ones were really, really great. The Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, very high freeboard, low superstructure, great looking ship. The other ones following, same concept, great. But then we start seeing this design change. And it's when they try to one-up the White Star Line's brand new Olympic class ocean liners, which is a trio of ships, as it's planned to be, with their own trio of ships that are big and impressive and even larger than the Olympic class. Their first one was, well, let's just say it had some teething problems, and they learned a lot of lessons in certain aspects of naval architecture. Let's see here.
So while you're doing that, so to having some excess water on the deck, Miss K. Griff says, "What about excess sea, men?" And American Steve said, "This is making it sound like Poseidon himself was starting to get a bit salty with this boat."
Yeah,
in the context of the dream, that sounds pretty close to accurate.
It does. It really does. Now, I've got a few pictures I do want to show quickly of this ship. This is the Imperator. She is like 913 feet long, which for reference, everyone, Titanic is 882 feet long, so just a little bit bigger. She's just a hair wider than the Olympics, like by 1 or 2 feet, so she's pretty similar to them. But you notice she has this enormous eagle on the bow, and this is kind of unique to Imperator. She was the last steamship to have a figurehead. It was kind of a very unique feature of it, which they ended up removing shortly thereafter because it kept getting damaged in the rough North Atlantic weather. And
Shocker.
This, by the way, is, since we were talking about freeboard, we can all see how much freeboard this ship has. Look how high that is up to this top exposed deck.
That's a tremendous amount of height.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, the problem, though, is that while this ship is very tall and very long, it doesn't quite have the necessary both width and depth to maintain the necessary stability. It has a lot of positive buoyancy, to be sure, but it's not very stable. And that goes into the fact that its center of gravity and its metacentric height were not... They needed to be a little bit further apart. And actually, if we look in this photo, we can actually see the list. It's actually leaning to the other side, away from the camera. If we can all kind of, you see how it's going off in that direction? Otherwise, if it was flat, it would be kind of going like this to the camera. Instead, it's kind of leaning off in that direction towards the right side. And in fact, in almost every photo I've been able to find of Imperator, she's actually listing about anywhere from about 4 to 5 degrees off to starboard, or her right-hand side. I do want to show another one of Imperator here. This is actually her in New York City, tied up, discharging passengers. And we can again see in this one, this is actually one of the few ones. Actually, no, I'm so sorry. She's actually leaning to the right, and I know the camera's. The cameraman's trying to follow the bow, but if you actually look and reference it to where all these guys are standing on this flat dock, it's leaning out. It's leaning towards the right again.
Oh. And real quick, just want to address this. We're getting rated by Winning Reality. Thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, thank you all. And thank you to Winning Reality for bringing everybody on over.
So that, if you want to save that cast iron question, I can talk a little bit more about that.
Already went ahead and saved it.
Okay. And lastly, and this one actually is a really poignant photo because it's actually taken from the kind of the opposite side of the Imperator. But we see it's leaning in towards these tugboats. We can again see from the angle of the deck and how
that's a significant lean.
Exactly. Even these guys walking on the ladder, they kind of have to lean to the left a little bit. So we can definitely see that. I mean, even for big ships, having a slight bit of instability is not unheard of. It's not what you want to design in your ship, but sometimes after the guy who's writing the check, so to speak, says he wants to add this, that, and the other, well, you have to figure out a way to make that fit in there somehow.
That's what she said.
And
to
some
kind of what Mrs.
design
K. Griff
changes
said.
get made, and then your initial calculations and mathematics and figures get thrown off, and then, well, you just try to make it work sometimes, and occasionally throughout maritime and naval history, we've seen ships they come out top heavy. Hell, Germany leading up to the Second World War in the 1930s designed an entire class of destroyers that literally could not go to sea without full fuel tanks and could not use the last third of that fuel. It was just basically ballast. They could not use.
Wow.
Yeah, they had to keep at least a third of their fuel in their tanks just to keep the ship upright. So it's, even in the 1930s, ships are being poorly designed. So it's not uncommon.
Seems like a slight design oversight.
It is. It absolutely is. Now, the Waratah, getting us back again on track here, Waratah arrives in Durban, South Africa, in the evening of July the 26th, 1909. Now, at this point, Claude Gustav Sawyer, who I realize I have so far neglected to show everyone a picture of this gentleman. And so whilst I'm thinking about it, I will go ahead and do that. So that way everyone can kind of see who we're talking about here.
All right. While you're doing that, I just want to say hi to Winning Reality. Thanks for sending everybody over, bud. And I say I greatly appreciate it. Say we're having a good time over here. And this is a very detailed, but I would say very fascinating story getting into this. All right.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is Claude Gustav Sawyer. He is the man who had the unusual, strange nightmares during the days leading up to the Waratah's arrival in Durban, and who was so convinced that this ship was unsafe that he had to get off. In fact, immediately upon getting off in Durban, he immediately sent a telegram to his wife stating, and this is pretty much verbatim, landed in Durban, felt Waratah top heavy. And they got to understand too, at the period, you were paying by the word, so you wanted to keep your message relatively short. But yeah so
say Twitter.
Exactly. But his whole thing is that he feels the ship is top heavy, and that's what he's conveying to his wife. And this is before Waratah has even left the harbor. He's saying this to her. And and shortly thereafter, within hours, in fact, very early the next day, again, long before Waratah has ever reported as missing or anything really has happened, he actually reports to an agent of the Blue Anchor Line there in Durban all of his suspicions about the ship, how he felt about the stability, and just kind of explained things, and also told him about his dream, which is really important because he conveyed all of this to someone who wasn't on the ship and didn't just disappear and die. So he talked to someone on land about these dreams and his concerns before anything had actually happened. So this is what gives him a lot of credibility with this.
That is interesting.
Want to show everyone one of the few photos we have of Captain Ilbery. This man has spent his entire life at sea, not unlike Captain Edward John Smith of the Titanic. In fact, they've got relatively similar stories.
Real quick there, Mamasaurus Rex says, loving Grand Admiral's passion for knowledge. There's a passion of knowledge, so.
Knowledge is, honestly, it's always been important to me. I feel that we need to understand our world. We need to understand history. We need to understand how we got as not just a country, but every civilization of peoples, how we all came to being, came throughout the thousands and thousands of years of history, but in my case, the last several hundred years, of how ultimately our world developed into the being that it is, how technologies change, how design changes, how people moving change history.
And mirroring Mamasaurus Rex, Miss K. Griff says, at Grand Admiral Harlock, I love how passionate you are about this. Say, knowledge is power.
That it is. It very much so is. But here, everyone, is Captain Ilbery, Captain Josiah Ilbery.
That is a manly beard.
Yes, it most definitely is. Like, he looks like a sea captain. Like, even if he was not in the hat and the coat, you saw him like that man sails in boats. He's
Yep.
a ship captain. But yeah, no, he's sailed his entire career. In fact, he's not too far off from retirement, really. And Waratah is probably going to be one of the last ships he commands. But he's got a few years left on him anyway. Or, no. So he would have.
Valhalla says it's a mediocre beard at best. Yes, we know every beard pales in comparison to your magnificent face fur, my friend.
I see some of the best, well, I guess beards, but really mustaches I've ever seen are those that come about in Victorian, like especially late 19th century, like facial hair. Fascinating and really, really cool.
So that's just something about the facial hair look of that period of time.
Very dapper, very. And of course, what's funny is a lot of that mustache style comes from India, which of course at the time was a British possession, British colony. But it's a symbol in India of your manliness is your beard. So of course, naturally, these British well-to-do, wealthy tourists coming over here, either for business or pleasure, are like, oh, I must grow one of those as well. And so they go back home with these mustaches, and thus is how we get it.
And Ian Cole, I have not heard of this one, so I'm going to save that question for later during our Q&A, and we'll dig into that one and say, I'm interested. American Steve Mustache, talk devices. Yep, Jeff has a very manly, face tribble.
Yeah, sadly, I don't. I find it's easiest, and with the line of work I have, it's easiest to keep myself clean shaven, and I don't know. It's a look I've maintained for 31 years, and that seems to be working out for me.
Yeah, I say if I didn't have this, then I'd look 12.
Yeah, people are surprised when I tell them my age because they think I'm a teenager or something. It's like, what's that young? God. I mean, I guess that's great for me whenever I get an old man and I look like I'm in my 40s. Like, okay.
There you go. W. Daisy Girl Williams, very cool topic.
And we have so much more to get into.
Oh yeah, we haven't even gotten into the disappearance yet. We're just in the lead up to the disappearance.
I told you, like, I've got material prepared to keep everyone entertained. This story plays out. It really does. So
I'm enjoying it a lot. Really, I am.
So Waratah raises anchor and raises steam late in the evening, like at night, well after dark, on the night of the 26th of July, and gets underway. The next time any living soul that we can confirm sights the Waratah is at about 4 in the morning. Well, it wasn't confirmed just yet, but at 4 in the morning, before I get too far into the story, I do want to pull up my next slide here.
I think I misidentified PM instead of AM in the in the description of the video then.
Oh.
Whoopsie.
Here we go. Which file is biggest? Okay.
Yep, Tweety says July 1909 was full of terrors. Yeah, I can agree with that.
Here we go. That's a good picture. All right. So about 4 o'clock in the morning of the 27th of July, 1909, this ship, under the command of Captain Veer, as a tramp steamer, much like what we were talking about before, called the SS Clan McIntyre. And this ship was traveling on a very similar course to Waratah, heading to Cape Town as well. And so she was traveling in a southwestern course following the Cape, following the coast of Africa. And at about 4 in the morning is when she initially sighted Waratah coming over the horizon. And being a much slower ship, only doing about 11 to 12 knots, and Waratah doing about 13 and a half, slowly but surely the Waratah overtakes and comes up alongside the Clan McIntyre. Well, not alongside, they're still clearly about a mile or two distant, but that's still close enough to see a ship plain as day and to exchange signals, which they do.
Right.
Which in this day and age, this is still like wireless telegraphy exists and wireless aboard ships exists, but it is an expensive system. As we all know, with any technology, when it's brand new, it is very expensive. And
Expensive, heavy, and unreliable usually.
yes, exactly. In fact, very quick side rant, part of the reason why the Titanic didn't just disappear mysteriously is because the wireless operators decided, instead of following company procedures and waiting for them to get to New York for a company man to come in and fix the wireless machine, they decided to fix it themselves, which was really important 24 hours later when the ship hit an iceberg. And this is the only reason Titanic didn't just disappear without a trace. Could you imagine all those people being left in those lifeboats out in the open ocean without any call for help, any sign of where the ship is? The Carpathia would not have known to turn around. Just, anyways,
Yeah.
I think about that sometimes. It's just like how on a knife's edge that disaster really hung to becoming even worse. But at this time, the Waratah, as well as the Clan McIntyre, they were not equipped with wireless. They did not have that ability to call for help at a long distance. They had what are called Morse lamps. Now, these are lamps with horizontal shutters on them,
Shutters, yeah.
and a handle on the side. And what you do is, by turning this handle, you open and close those shutters, basically turning your light on and off to the perspective of the viewing ship at a distance. And by flashing your light on and off, you can signal in Morse code and talk to the other ship, which is effectively how Waratah has been communicating this whole time to other ships. In general, what was standard practice at this time was for ships to share their name, share their destination, and generally share anything unusual about the weather or anything of note to report. Like if suddenly a war breaks out, like World War I has begun or something, it's like, oh crap, well that's good to know as we're heading back to Europe, or something like that.
Yeah.
Any important news to relay. And it would be very, very quick, only really relaying that information, and then usually a quick, goodbye or cheerio or ta-ta or something like that. And then the ships would, get too far apart and, off it would disappear. And at about 9:30 in the morning on the 27th is when Clan McIntyre's captain reported that Waratah disappeared ahead of him over the horizon, with the column of smoke, very quickly thereafter pittering out as it disappeared. And because this is the last ship to officially converse under well enough conditions to have a conversation with the Waratah, this is the last confirmed sighting. After this, as far as we know, anything could have happened. But there are a couple of other sightings that were dismissed by the inquiry that I do need to point out. Now, by this time, Waratah, and I'm going to kind of bring up a map again here. Here we go. All right, so this is South Africa, everybody. Now, so everyone kind of follow my cursor here. This is Durban. This is where the Waratah has just departed, and she has been making steam heading in this general direction. Now, the sighting of the Waratah by the Clan McIntyre was just off the mouth of the Bashi River, which is right here. This is the Bashi River. So this is about how far the Waratah had gotten to when she was basically parallel with the Clan McIntyre and was having a conversation with Clan McIntyre via light signals. So this is basically the last general position where we know the ship was. Now, later on that day, at about 5:30 p.m. So we went from 9:30 in the morning, so now almost 12 hours have passed to this next incident, where the captain of a steamship called the SS Harlow reported seeing in the distance, steaming well behind them, but coming up fast, as it looked like a ship steaming up quickly towards them, was a vessel that was belching a massive amount of smoke. Was just clearly either on fire and in distress, or was absolutely burning the crap out of some really low quality coal. And I mean, they were burning it as fast as they could, which, if they were trying to get to the seat of a fire in a bunker, they might be potentially doing. But that's just speculation. So he sees this ship over the period of several minutes. And at about, and this is when he starts to see it, and it's just kind of slowly approaching. And it's about 8 o'clock at night. So this is about 2.5 hours later that he sees two brilliant, bright flashes of light coming from that, what he believes is a steamer. Now, part of the reason why he believes it's a steamer is he's seen two, what he describes as masthead lights. Now, on a steamship, you typically have two masts, one at the front, one at the back, just like Waratah, Titanic, so on and so forth. And you have lights at the very, very top of those masts. Now, those help other people at night looking at your ship to see, if I only see one light, it's either going straight at me or straight away from me. If I see two lights, then it's somewhere the side I'm looking at. And the same thing, if we see a green light, we're looking at the left side. I'm sorry, we're looking at the right side. If we see a red light, we're looking at the other side. So, that helps. Those lights at night are basically your only way to differentiate, to see a ship and to tell where the heck it's going and roughly how fast it's going. So because he sees these two masthead lights, one slightly above the other in the distance, and a single red light at a very slight angle, he thinks that there's some ship slightly at an angle coming up towards him. Then he sees these flashes right around 8 o'clock. The first one is 300 feet high, he estimates. It's just this brilliant, like Roman candle flare. And then seconds later, a second one, a towering column about 1,000 feet high of just a flash, and then nothing. The smoke dissipates. The steamer is gone. Whatever it is he sighted it's missing. He cannot see any debris, cannot see a single thing. Now, this sighting is dismissed for two reasons. One of the other officers who's familiar with the area, he had regularly seen what are known as brush fires, where along the coast of South Africa, this dry brush will frequently catch fire and burn, as one person has described, with the enthusiasm of a child in a candy store. It goes. It just, as anyone who's ever seen a lot of dry brush get burned, it just gets all consumed in a matter of seconds. And it's a brilliant, bright flash. And when it goes up a hillside, it looks like a fire. It looks like a flash just traveling up the hillside and going upward slightly. And because it's at that point very, very dark, and because there's conflicting reports back and forth, it's not entirely clear. Did they see a steamer explode, or did they just see some fire on the shore? Which, if they did see a steamer explode, and the fact that there are small communities of both villages and tribes and so forth along there, why has no one seen an exploding ship? Which, another thing, they saw those flashes, but they did not hear any explosion.
Interesting.
It was a very odd event that took place, but because of that conflicting report by the other officer, and because of the time and the location, which to the officials of the inquiry meant that the Waratah would have had to double back. Instead of continuing on to Cape Town, would have had to turn around 180 degrees and start going back towards Durban, which this sighting took place. Goodness, let me stop sharing. Oh, yeah, here we go. Sorry, I realized I could have just used the same map for what I was going to do. So it's interesting. So here's the Bashi River, right? So here's Durban, right? So the Waratah sailed this far, right? Now, this was the last reported sighting by the Clan McIntyre. The reported sighting by the Harlow is right over here, back along the track, and a full 12 hours later. So if this is to be believed, Waratah steamed this way for about 6 hours thereabouts and then doubled back on her course in this direction, if that sighting is to be believed, which they believe that for whatever reason the officials at the inquiry believe that Waratah would have continued on. And of course, considering the fact that no other steamships were lost in the, as we'll soon talk about, very rough weather, they kind of felt that with Waratah, the issue is that the ship would have continued on to Cape Town without any concern for the swells, for the rough weather, because so far in the last year and some change that she's been operating, she's not sunk. She's encountered several storms, and it seemed to them, with a captain as experienced as Ilbury, that quite frankly, it seemed more likely to them that the ship would just plow on to Cape Town and try to keep on schedule. After all, he was definitely a loyal company man, is a good way to describe him, and definitely realized that he was basically running a big Greyhound bus. He had a schedule to keep. And that has many of times been the downfall of a ship, is someone trying to keep to a particular schedule. But the final and probably one of the more unusual, well, it's a very odd sighting that can probably be dismissed even a little bit more so than the Harlow, but it bears mentioning nonetheless. And this happens at 9:30 p.m. So this is about a full hour and a half after whatever flare up or explosion or brush fire that the Harlow sighted happened. And this is on a path that is, let's see here. So it's actually about here, not too far from East London, that this event occurs, where the SS Guelph sights, or at least believes that they sight, the Waratah. And just so we can all kind of see what kind of ship is out there with her, here we go. Everyone give me 1 second. My computer has decided this is the moment it's going to open Microsoft Edge, which I don't need at this moment.
You're all right. Well, Miss K. Griff, okay, everyone, time for me to head out. Bye. Good to see you, Miss K. Griff. Thank you for coming to hang out. Say, always a pleasure.
All right, here we go. So this is the SS Guelph. Now, she is a steamship of the Union Castle line, which is operating basically all the way down to South Africa. This is basically the route that it runs, is from England, or I should say the United Kingdom, down to South Africa. And it's a ship a little bit smaller than the Waratah. It's about 350 feet long, thereabouts. Well, about 375 to 400 feet long. They're in that neck of the woods. So it's a little bit smaller than Waratah, and it is steaming right along. It is dealing with these waves and swells that are very, very common off the coast of South Africa, and it is handling it beautifully. And what it reports seeing in the distance at about 9:30 is over the crests of these waves, they see another ship that vaguely, as they describe, matches the description of the Waratah. And they're trying to flash signals to them. And between the driving rain and the waves and the really poor visibility, they just cannot decipher what the heck this ship is trying to say. They can't make a word of it. The only thing they can make out is as the ship is starting to kind of pass by or start to get a distance from them, it flashes out at least 3 letters that they can discern. T A H. Ta. Now, was it flashing the name of the ship and they only caught the last 3 letters, as in Waratah? Or, much like with other telegraphers, were they just simply flashing ta-ta, like, all right, well, communication is clearly not working. Have a safe voyage, ta-ta. And that's all they saw. Was it something like that? We don't know. Was it even the Waratah at all exactly that she saw? We just don't know. But this is where the mystery just gets weird, is because we just can't put a pin on the map and say for sure that we saw the ship, that the ship was at this location at this time. This is all just speculation, really. We're uncertain exactly if it was the Waratah or not, and there's no way to ever be sure. But the crew aboard thought that it looked similar, and that's what they saw. And ultimately, that's, in a lot of these cases, that's all we have to go on. Now, I do want to talk about some of the search effort. Well, some of the first confirmed sightings of debris. We'll call it that for the moment. The first ship is the SS Tottenham. Let's see here. Yet another tramp steamer, as we can see, with that classic spar deck design, 3 structures, a raised forecastle, a raised poop deck, and then a raised central structure here in the middle. And this vessel was working against this was working against the seas when from the position of the bridge, which you can actually see where the ship's wheel is up here on this raised platform. So from this vantage point, one of the officers actually called, and there's also a ship's wheel below as well. But from this high vantage point, the helmsman, had seen as they were charging along at like 11 knots through the sea, what he was very sure was a 9 to 10-year-old girl in a red dress floating by in the sea, and that not far from it was what he believed was the torso of an individual. Now, moments later, the officer on watch stepped onto the bridge, and he immediately told him what he saw. The officer of the watch stepping out onto the bridge wings to try to look back and see what he can discern. He can almost kind of see something red, but he's not exactly sure what it is. And so he goes below to the chart room to report to the captain and the other officers what they've seen. At once, the captain orders the ship put about and doubles back on its course, but they cannot find that body again. They just can't. Now, one of the big problems with finding any debris or bodies is the ridiculously strong currents that are off the coast of South Africa. The big one is called the Agulhas Current. Now, this current moves at an average speed of about 3 meters every second. That is how fast it is going. Yes.
That's actually pretty fast.
It is very, very fast. So, and it kind of helps because like Waratah, where she's only traveling about 13 and a half knots, with that assistance, she's actually moving at about 15 and a half knots, somewhere in that ballpark. So she's actually got a little bit of like help going along, as with any ship traveling in that general direction. And matter of fact, I do want to kind of show everyone what that actually looks like, because it does have a lot to do with one of the main theories about why the Waratah disappeared. Let's see here. All right, so again, we're looking at South Africa, but instead we're actually focusing out in the oceans here. So if we can follow this line of red arrows, this is the Agulous Current flowing along here and then doubling back on itself and then flowing in this general direction. Now, two important things. With this kind of a current, it has a certain habit of taking things that are just freely drifting on it and basically flinging those objects back out into the Indian Ocean, as we can see from this movement. And
Mm-hmm.
this part of the leg is helped by the predominant winds that come through this part of the world. In this area, we have what are called the westerlies, which are winds that blow in, well, they come from a westerly direction and they blow east. I know that sounds confusing, but but they blow in an eastward direction, so from a left to right direction. Now, when you have contrary currents and winds working against each other, that is where you can get very dangerous weather and very dangerous waves. Very unusual wave action occurring on a fairly regular basis when you have that kind of an interaction going on. Now, with this current, like I said, it tends to take debris and just deposit it wherever and just take it away very quickly. This makes further sense as yet another ship spotted what it found to be bodies. But unfortunately, well, both because the captain was hesitant to get it, but also with how quickly the bodies were being swept past, they just, plus the rough weather, it just was not deemed safe to retrieve these bodies that this other ship sighted. And this was a few days afterwards. I think this was like the 30th or 31st or something like that. This was towards the very end of the month of July. This particular steamship, here we go.
He froze. Okay, well, we'll just kind of give him a little second there. It looks like his computer might have froze. I know he's had some computer troubles there. All right. There we go. And while we're waiting to kind of get back there, so yeah, just kind of letting y'all know again. Yep, there he went. Okay. I'll wait for him to pop back in the chat there. I'll bring him back up. And say when. All right. American Steve, abandoned ship, everything's sinking. Oh wait, just a computer glitch. Yep. Everything's actually been going really well, and then yeah, just had a little bit of a computer, just go down, which sometimes things happen. So yeah, we'll just give him a minute for him to do that and come back up. All right. Meanwhile, while we're doing that, or we'll kind of waiting for him to come back there. So again, just kind of reiterate, I have a bunch of starred messages that I have saved back here. So questions that everybody's asked, because we are going to do a little bit of a Q&A, and it's going to be a pretty broad spectrum Q&A on just kind of like some questions that people have, like not doesn't even have to specifically be related to the Waratah. Can be pretty much anything. Say Harlock is going to be really open to talk with anybody about that and just kind of see what questions you want answered. So yeah, I went ahead and saved those back, so that way we could answer those later. and still just waiting for him to pop back in here. But kind of while we're waiting here to kind of fill time, so as I definitely want to make sure everybody definitely, if you haven't already done so, please definitely go down there, hit that like button, and please also subscribe so that way we can go ahead and keep making good videos for you and whatnot. So yeah, with regard, let's see, probably the internet dipping out for a sec happens sometimes around this time. Okay, well, shouldn't be any major deal. So we should be able to go ahead and fill time until he gets back. But yeah, kind of yeah, while we're waiting for Harlock to get back and whatnot and get reloaded here. So yeah, just kind of let everybody know. So we did cover the UAP press conference again earlier today. We did cover it live, and I got to be honest, it was thoroughly surprising. I was shocked, frankly, at the level of information and what came out of that, because I feel like I'm going to go to bed tonight and I'm going to not be able to sleep, as tired as I am, because we literally live in a different world than we did before 10 o'clock this morning. I haven't had this kind of a feeling, just that gut reaction that everything is different and nothing is ever going to go back to the way it was since a certain date in time, you know, couple buildings, New York, things that happened, you know. Let's see, that was what? Let's see, 2023, that would have been 22 years ago. So yeah, just so so I don't have to actually say it out loud. So oh, kittens hit our router box. It's booting back up. Okay, no big deal. So that means, yeah, he'll be back pretty soon. But yeah, it's a really weird situation, because it's one of those times in my life where I literally feel like life has changed inextricably. It's changed, and it's never going to go back to the way it was before, because we've literally at this point proven, and at least has been said, is proven insofar as not necessarily showing us where things are. I'm sure that'll come within time, but yeah, under oath in a congressional setting in front of members of Congress, say the infamous now David Grush sat before Congress and said, absolutely, the United States has basically non-human craft that have been recovered, and with that we have recovered the non-human pilots. That's pretty wild. So
Yeah, I don't want
all right, go ahead and bring you back up here. Welcome back there, buddy.
Hey, sorry about that, everyone. I got a couple new kittens, and they seem to have found the box that the router is plugged into. So, hey, convenient little switch on the back, very light to the touch.
Yep, no worries there. Say was able to go ahead and fill in a little time for you there, and we'll go ahead and get right back to it. So,
now unfortunately, I did not. I just kept talking, so I had no knowledge that I was not being heard. So, where were we exactly when I last left off?
Okay, well, that was actually, let me back up. I've got the other stream over here on the other window.
They were literally on top of it again.
Okay, you were talking about the current.
Okay, so I
And
was
yeah, I was talking
talking
about
about the currents going on there.
spotted the currents and
So,
one ship that had spotted some bodies and they didn't come back around to go check.
yep. So because they didn't go back around to check to actually pick up the bodies and confirm the bodies, that was the reason why that
Hey,
sighting
Bubby.
of the Waratah was actually disregarded by the official inquiry. Or, again, it's just hearsay. It's circumstantial. There's no hard evidence. You didn't take that body out so we could, try to identify it if it was a passenger of the Waratah. So again, that was dismissed. There's just no way to be sure. Now, there is one final sighting of the Waratah, which is one done by a man named Joe Conqueror. A heck of a name. This gentleman was in a rifle in the South African Rifles, and he was effectively performing observations for firing drills that they were going to be conducting the following day. So he was doing pre-sighting effectively. And from his hilltop position on the coast, he was looking out to sea through his various observation devices for calculating range, distance, and wind and so forth. So he was basically trying to factor all that in, making these observations from this hilltop. And he's looking out into open sea, and he sees a ship out there, and it is rolling with the swells. It is just in it. And he describes it as a long black hull with a creamed coffee painted upperworks and a black funnel. Now, that sounds an awful lot like the Waratah. And what he sees is this ship rolling and rolling in the swells. And then what he says is he sees it disappear. Now, whether it's disappear from his view and behind the waves, because it's hard to imagine these mountainous-sized waves from people like us who don't live by the ocean and don't see this either every day or every now and again at least. But you basically have these walls of water where at some point what you're viewing does disappear behind both the water, the mist, the spray, the driving rain, the poor visibility. At some point it does disappear. So it's not clear. Did it just disappear from view, or did it maybe roll over behind a wave and just disappear from his vantage point? It's not exactly clear, unfortunately. But his account is at least accepted that he saw something. I mean, the guy was in the Rifles. He eventually goes on to become a sergeant first class, I believe, or whatever. He was basically near enough as high of a non-commissioned officer as you can get. So the guy is knowledgeable, has a lot of experience, and clearly knows his way around in a military environment. He's no fool.
Okay.
So I believe that Joe Conqueror did see something. I can't say if it was the Waratah. I can't say if it was perhaps another similar-ish looking ship that in the rough visibility just was tossing around as well. But I do know that he saw something and that it was significant enough for him to report it.
All right,
Now,
real quick there. AP says, "Gotta head to bed. Y'all have a good night. Good night, AP. Thank you so much for joining us." And
okay.
a hello to MLS Law Show. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Let's say Murph's Turf says MLS. He's like, you're late in the class. We learned how passenger cargo ships are designed. To say, we did. So
And I
we
barely
learned a lot
really
on
scratched
that.
the surface. I really am just talking about some very, very surface level, just things to be aware of when talking about ships and boats, really. I mean, regardless of if you're designing 1,000-foot long ocean liner or a 30-foot long boat, you have to take these into consideration. Now, the Waratah was due by her schedule to arrive in Cape Town on the 29th of July. It was not unusual at all for ships to arrive days or even weeks late. This has happened on
Mhm.
many occasions, either because of bad weather, mechanical issues suffered out at sea that they had to fix, or some other issues have occurred throughout history. But that has happened many times where ships just arrive on the, arrive a little late. And so in the first day or two, Waratah not turning up there was no immediate alarm. It was like, she'll show up, she'll turn up eventually.
Right.
But then days turned into a week, and now it's like, okay, something's wrong. No other ships that are going back and forth along the Waratah's path are reporting seeing the Waratah. We've got these weird conflicting reports of bodies being sighted. So it's time to really put in an effort and try to look for this ship. So the Royal Navy actually dispatches 3 of their protected cruisers off the nearby squadron in order to start a search. And these are significant ships, I want to add. Protected cruisers, they're mid-sized vessels made for long-range operations, basically operating away from UK waters, like here in South Africa, like we're talking about. Now, the first one, I won't show all of these. I'm just going to show one, but these are the HMS Forte of the Estrella class, the HMS Pandora of the Pelorus class, and finally HMS Hermes of the High Flyer class. Hermes, I do want to actually show you here.
Okay. And Lefty Lulls. Hi, people I've never met in my life before. Good to see you there, Lefty Lulls. Thank you for joining us. Always happy to have somebody else on board.
Absolutely. This is the Royal Navy protected cruiser HMS Hermes. It's, like I said, a high flyer class. This is a type of ship that would have been built in the very early 1900s and would have served in the First World War. Now, as we can see, we can see these men standing on deck. These are guys probably an average of about 6 foot or almost thereabouts. So we could kind of have some kind of an idea as to how large of a ship we're talking about. It's about, and I'm trying to remember exactly. I believe it's about a 340 to 50 foot long vessel, fairly substantial. I believe she is powered by turbines. So she's a very swift, very capable, and powerfully armed vessel. But when she starts looking for the Waratah in the rough seas off of South Africa, she starts running into problems. And in fact, her hull is battered so relentlessly by the seas, by these vicious, roaring seas off the coast of South Africa, that she has to immediately go back and be put into dry dock for repair. So she takes an absolute walloping out there. Now, one thing I do regret not mentioning this, but one of the, like I said, the last ship that officially sighted the Waratah, the SS Clan McIntyre, that Captain Veer, stated that just hours after the Waratah disappeared from sight, just a little bit later that day, the weather started to change from a calm into a gale. The wind started to pick up, and by the early hours of the next day, on the 28th, it was the most violent storm that this ship captain had ever experienced in his years at sea. And he's been a captain of a ship for at least 13 years. So that's just in that time alone, commanding vessels. All the seas he has gone through, all the storms he's encountered, this was by far the worst, in his own words, that he had ever seen. So whatever Waratah sailed off into, it was one hell of a tempest. So I wanted to say that just to give everyone some context as to how severe of a storm that we're specifically talking about was kicking up in the days and really weeks from the 28th onward on July of 1909. So severe that captains don't find it safe to pick up bodies. So severe that Royal Navy protected cruisers are getting just hammered by the sea to the point where they need extensive time in a dry dock for reforming their hull. It was a very nasty storm. Now, one of the other things that I do also want to mention really quick before we start talking about the search efforts, the further search efforts to try to find this ship, is another ship that actually disappeared, and its odd similarities to the Waratah. I think longtime viewers of your channel will be very familiar with the Bermuda Triangle and with the mystery of the USS Cyclops, a Royal Navy collier that disappeared in 1916 in the Caribbean. Well, this particular ship that we're talking about, the Waratah, has some unique features which are very similar to the Cyclops, namely that crucial element that we've talked about, freeboard. The Waratah, when fully loaded, had a freeboard of about 8 feet 1 inch or 8 feet 3 inches. It's really right around in there, depending on certain circumstances. And almost identical is the Cyclops, with a freeboard of about 8 feet 6 inches. So again, that like right in that 8-foot line of just having just about that much space between the surface of the water and a flat calm and the top of your ship. And the waves that they are encountering, and I just want to point this out, that Captain Veer reported, he was seeing waves in excess of 30 foot, smashing over his ship. And he was far behind the Waratah. The Waratah steamed on ahead in the horizon, so I can only imagine how much worse the storm got for Waratah.
Sure.
Now, with Waratah disappearing like this, as I have said, it's not unusual for ships to be late on their arrival back to port. And even while the Royal Navy was scouring the seas with these cruisers, they were still convinced that the Waratah was out there to be found. It was there. It had to be afloat somewhere. The ship couldn't have just sank. It's got to be there somewhere. And in fact, a lot of people, and in fact, even a lot of family members of the Waratah, thought back to just 10 years previously, in 1899, when the steamship Waikato, the New Zealand shipping company, and I do want to show everyone this image because this is this incident gave a lot of hope to people during those early days. Let's see here. All right, this is the SS Waikato of the New Zealand New Zealand Shipping Company. Now, this is a really interesting design ship. In fact, it's got a really neat clipper bow here, very reminiscent of sailing vessels. I really do like that aesthetic. Now, this steamship was actually following a course very similar to the Waratah back in 1899, traveling to Cape Town, following southwesterly along the coast of Africa, when suddenly its single triple expansion steam engine broke down. And they're in the middle of rough weather, and they have no one around them to call for help. They don't have any wireless, of course, at this point, and there's no one to signal to. This ship drifted for 103 days before it was found by another ship and towed to Australia. This ship had traveled 2,500 nautical miles, all on its own, with no power. So because this ship, for 103 days, was just out there in the open ocean, drifting around, waiting to be found, there was this hope that that exact same thing had befallen the Waratah, that somewhere out there in the oceans, she was there, maybe listing a little, maybe a little battered by the storm, clearly needing a tow, but they really thought that she was out there somewhere. And I'm going to get into that as well as we go.
So just to kind of let you know here, we're at 2 hours, 55 minutes. So I definitely want to try and kind of encapsulate if we can, because we still got a little bit of Q&A, and I know I've got to be hitting the sack soon. I've got some, I got to work tomorrow.
Sometimes I think I prepared too much material.
You're thorough. That's the good thing.
Yeah, at least I am. I genuinely am.
Yep. I'll
I'll
be
give you
right
all
back. I'll let you go ahead and run on that while I'll be right back.
Alrighty. So with that hope in mind, there were two different search efforts that were initiated. One was by the company that owned the Waratah, the Blue Anchor Line. They hired the Union Castle steamship, let's see here. Actually, no, I'm so sorry. They hired yet a different steamship to actually conduct a search for the Waratah, and it covered about 16,000 nautical miles, looking along the path where Waratah would have sailed, where it would have drifted by the currents, and nothing was ever found. A short while later, and unsatisfied with the result of the first search, the family members of the Waratah's lost passengers and crew, they got together and raised enough money to hire their own steamship, a steamship of the Union Line called the SS Sabine. Now, this ship as well, it covered an extensive search area over several months, and in fact covered herself 14,000 nautical miles. And again, could not find anything, not a single bit of debris, nothing. And so, with that, the official inquiry into the loss was conducted with all the available evidence. And, well, it is believed that the Waratah was simply lost due to the unusual and severe weather which she encountered. Now, something that was not well known in 1909, but is well known today, is something that did start initially as just a theory, but now is absolutely confirmed to be a thing, are rogue waves. If you've never heard of them, rogue waves are probably one of the most powerful expressions of the raw strength of the oceans. Imagine, if you will, a wall of water 100 foot high coming out of nowhere and smashing into your ship, leaving you no time to respond. If anyone's ever seen the Poseidon Adventure or Poseidon or any of the subsequent films that follow a ship called Poseidon that gets hit by a big wave and rolls over, you'll know what I'm talking about. In fact, the very incident that is portrayed in the original Poseidon, which effectively is taken from an actual event that took place in December or February of 1943, where the ocean liner RMS Queen Mary got hit by a massive rogue wave, estimated, I believe, at about 95 feet high, somewhere in that ballpark, and rolled the ship over to about 53 degrees before she slowly righted herself. Prior to that, there have been other ocean liners that had other large ocean liners that have had encounters with rogue waves on the open sea, and have survived and come home to tell the stories of these strange phenomena happening. It makes a lot of sense why it became just a thing of sailor folklore, these massive waves. It seems something of tall tales, as there was no survivors, no one out there to actually measure these things. But it's not until really the 1970s and 80s that we start seeing actual hard evidence and recorded data coming back on this phenomena, showing waves in excess, at least twice the height of the surrounding waves. So a rogue wave technically can just mean that, just a single wave or a series of waves that are formed that are at least twice the height of the surrounding waves. They're formed usually by a convergence of contrary winds and currents, or by winds whipping multiple waves into a single massive wave. There's a couple other things that can happen as well, but generally those are the two that most often result in a rogue wave, or even what's known as a freak wave, which is the same thing, being formed. And these walls of water, they will travel for quite some distance before they peter out, very much like a tornado. Eventually, they might form back into three smaller separate waves or break up and something like that. But rogue waves are very, very deadly. And wouldn't you know it, of all the places in the world that we've recorded rogue waves, The one place where rogue waves happen the most often is off the coast of South Africa, naturally. They come up out of nowhere, they strike, and then they disappear. They are as close, it almost seems like there's a certain mind to it, a certain intention, but there's not. I do want to kind of give you guys kind of a sense as to what we're talking about here. This is probably one of the most famous photos ever taken of a rogue wave. This is in the Bay of Biscay in 1940. This is during the Second World War. This is a cargo ship, a tanker actually, en route, I believe, to the Mediterranean. And basically, while passing through a very heavy storm of about 30-foot swells, suddenly this massive wall just appears in front of them. And they happen to have cameras out at the time where we're taking photos. So it's just a very lucky chance that anyone ever snapped a photo of one of these monsters. And this is the first one that we have.
Wow.
Now, rogue waves are responsible for many ships disappearing in history. In fact, in 1978, the MS München, while en route to Savannah, Georgia, while currently in the middle of the Atlantic, just north of the Azores, was passing through a very severe storm. And we do believe that she was struck by at least one or a series of rogue waves. We know this because of the debris that was found, one of the lifeboats that was located, which was located over 60 feet off the surface of the water, was wrenched by some massive shearing force from its davits. Its pins were still in there. It just wrenched it clean from the ship, which indicates nothing but a rogue wave. And it's very evident, based on radio signals received, that the ship got hit by these rogue waves. It didn't immediately sink, but was listing at about 50 degrees, trying to restore power and floating, helpless, for 33 hours is what we estimate, before she finally sank with all hands. So knowing that, it almost makes you wonder about the Waratah. Did she maybe initially survive some massive battering of a rogue wave or two, and then just float at an angle, helpless, being battered by the remaining waves, slowly but surely succumbing, no one coming to their aid, no way to call for help? One of the many theories, in fact, probably the strongest theory that we have about the disappearance of the Waratah. There are some others, such as a boiler explosion or a coal fire explosion, but it seems if that did happen, we would find more debris. When a ship blows up or something like that happens,
There's a lot of chunks.
there's chunks. There's so many different chunks of so many different types and sizes. There's wood aplenty. Something gets found. We would see more than just a few bodies, which, given the fact that there's not much debris, suggests to me that the ship sank very quickly all at once. And the fact that there's very few bodies indicates that either there were a few people who like tried in an instant to try to make their way out, and only, or maybe they were already on deck. Who knows? But I tell you what, the Waratah has definitely made me think a lot and made me speculate and wonder as to everything that could have happened, because there's so many unknowns with this particular case as compared to so many others. Lastly, I do want to talk about a few other ships, because the Waratah was not the only ship named the Waratah to have unfortunate circumstances befall it. In fact, in my research, I've come across 5 different ships that bore the name Waratah that have all run into trouble of various types. One was a sailing vessel back in the, again, I unfortunately don't have my dates pulled up here, but it was back in the 1850s. I'm sorry, I think it was 1848, something like that it ran into trouble. It was a sailing lug, and it ran aground and ended up being abandoned and then later towed back. So you could almost kind of count that one. But the other ones are, well, the ship properly runs into trouble and sinks. There's a schooner that sinks in the 1870s. There's a steamship in 1880, I think 1889 or something like that, bearing the name of the Waratah, that sinks off the coast of Australia. There's even a paddle steamship, if I remember correctly, called the Waratah, that ran into trouble as well, coming into Sydney. And then there was yet another sailing, and it was kind of weird, just the number of these ships I was coming across bearing the name of Waratah that ran into trouble. I mean, you don't really see that with too many names. So much trouble.
Note to self: do not name my boat Waratah.
I do not. Which is so the name Waratah actually comes from the emblem flower of New South Wales, which is like the southern state of Australia.
Yep.
The Waratah is a really beautiful, like pinkish flower that grows on this shrub. But it's a very lovely flower, and a nice thing to name a ship after, but just don't do it.
Yeah. Seems like the name's a little on the cursed side.
It does. It definitely does. But with that, and with no trace of the Waratah having ever been found, and all the amount of searches that have been mounted, even one famously supported and funded by Clive Cussler, still turned up nothing. They found the wreck of a ship that was sunk in the Second World War by a torpedo from a U-boat, but they did not find the Waratah, unfortunately.
So 114 years pretty much now to the day
Basically.
this thing left port.
Disappeared with 211 people and was never seen or heard from again after that exchange with the Clan McIntyre. So
pretty much at this time 114 years ago, this disaster occurred.
Exactly. Sobering thoughts.
Very much so. All right. Well, any other final thoughts? Do we want to kick it off to Q&A?
Honestly, I'm ready to kick it off to Q&A.
All right.
So yeah, any questions we might have?
I've got 8 questions saved up. Anybody wants to throw another out there, go ahead and throw it in the chat. Just maritime related and whatnot. So first up there, Tweety asked, why did they think the Titanic was unsinkable? If you can give us that in your quickest elevator pitch.
Absolutely. So with Titanic, the reason why she was considered to be unsinkable, and in fact, you have to understand where that wording comes from. It's actually someone being quoted. Specifically, both the designers, as advertised, and the captain both stated the ship was practically unsinkable. Now, that's the important thing there. Most people forget, and news headlines forget the word practically and leave that off. But
yeah,
in terms of that, yes, she was practically, and in fact, she was designed to handle a lot of different incidents that could have occurred. A head-on collision, partial sideswipe. She could have gotten hit by another ship. In fact, the Olympic, her sister ship, did get rammed by a Royal Navy armored cruiser. A Royal Navy protected cruiser, and sailed herself under steam back into harbor, or back into a dry dock to get fixed with a gaping hole in the side of it, because the ship was designed so well to handle that kind of impact. So, and in fact, they also had a double bottom hull so they could run over something and not flood into the ship. So by certain measures, the ship was practically unsinkable. Unfortunately, though, the one thing that they did not design the Olympic or the Titanic for was to take a several 100-foot-long gash along the side of the ship and on the underside of the ship, thereby opening up seams in more than 4 watertight compartments. Titanic was designed to stay afloat with either any 2 watertight compartments of its 16 watertight compartments flooded, or the first 4 compartments, which is what they expected if they ran head-on into trouble.
Okay.
They didn't expect to sideswipe something to open up 6 watertight compartments and start flooding that much. That just was not something they calculated in their mathematics, as it were. So that's a little bit about it. So it was, to a certain extent, unsinkable. At least it could survive a lot of things that would sink a ship, but it could not survive everything. But we improved on that. They learned how they could best improve a ship to try to avoid that. And in fact, Britannic also had a proper full double hull. So if she hit an iceberg, she wouldn't have sank the same way. But instead, she hit a mine, and she also sank because, of course, she was not designed to hit a mine in the middle of day during shift change when all the watertight bulkheads were wide open to allow the crew to pass through. Bad time of day to hit a mine.
Yeah.
But anyways,
And yeah, Tweety's one of her next questions was the Waratah was thought to be unsinkable too.
to an extent, and a lot of the wording in our modern I don't know, reference to ships that are being unsinkable usually revolves around the fact that they have watertight compartmentalization, which Waratah did have. Same with Titanic, same with any other ship that's being built at this period under the regulations of Lloyd's, Lloyd's of London. They set the standards, and very much so. If you're to build a ship and operate on the oceans, you have to have watertight compartmentalization. And so because of that, Waratah was thought to be unsinkable. But again, this is a case where if you flood one, maybe two of those compartments, then yeah, the ship's not going to sink. It's not going to lose enough reserve or positive buoyancy to revert it to a negative buoyant state whereby it's sinking. There is enough compartmentalization to ensure that even without the efforts of the crew, that this ship, both Waratah and Titanic, can basically function as their own lifeboat for a little bit. Crew gets involved, they start manning the pumps, and getting those underway, pumping that water out, and trying to do something about the damage, the breach, whatever it is, and doing whatever they can. So for those reasons, Waratah was thought that she would also, in some sense, be unsinkable. But
all right, next question: was it a cast iron ship?
No, and cast iron, that's a very specific process of making, and you don't really see it in ships. You don't see that kind of material being used in ship production. You just see iron, but not like cast iron. It's a little bit more refined and processed. A little bit more of the impurities are removed because you want to make the iron as strong as possible. And in fact, at this point in ship construction, iron has given way to steel, and ultimately you turn one from the other through a heating process and introducing various elements into the steel, such as carbon, or into the iron and so forth. You remove the impurities, you add things to it, and ultimately you turn that into steel. You refine it further. And steel is not only stronger than iron, but it is denser, par for par. So say, for instance, talking about a warship, let's say you have a foot of armor. Well, if you have a foot of armor of iron, it's going to provide nowhere near the resistive strength as a foot of steel. And in fact, that iron is going to weigh a lot more than that steel. So with steel, you're getting something that weighs a little bit less. You can use a little bit less of it because the material is stronger than iron. But then also, it gives you a better material and a more resistive and a more ductile material. Iron tends to be rather brittle, but once you get steel to the certain through this process, through adding carbon to there's a great naval historiographer by the name of Drakini Fell on YouTube who does a really great video on how to produce armor. I really recommend everyone check it out. It basically kind of talks about this process of making steel and how you refine it for these kind of purposes. Okay. But yeah, it was made of steel, as with all ship construction at this period, not cast iron.
All right, Ian Cole say, y'all ever heard of the last Saskatchewan pirate? I looked that up. That seems to be some kind of a folk song.
Okay, so that might be why I'm not up on it. But yeah, no, I've not heard of that one. But I do like pirates. I do read a lot on those.
Mamasaurus Rex, could the ship have gotten turned around because of fog or someone very inexperienced?
Not fog. And the thing is that you don't see a whole heck of a lot of fog in that particular area because of how fog is formed. What you do have in terms of poor visibility is rain, a lot of rain, because if you've ever looked at a distance through rain, you see less and less and less. And everything that you see almost becomes kind of pixelated and blurred at a distance. So what you see in terms of visibility reduction typically is all driving rains and raging seas. It's not really to do with fog. And the thing is that when you have that kind of sea state, any fog gets dispersed anyways. You have this wind coming one way, along the westerlies, and then you have the currents going the other way at a very, very quick clip. I will say that the current is usually about 20 degrees warmer than the water around it. So I suppose there is the potential, but given the fact that the water is always so choppy and moving, and usually for fog to develop, like in San Francisco, you need calmer-ish waters than what you'd see there, and you need slightly different environmental factors.
Okay.
But yeah, no, but with someone being inexperienced too, I don't believe that. Captain Ilbury would ultimately have been the one who would, especially during that rough weather, would have been on the bridge at all times. If the helmsman was inexperienced, that didn't matter, because if he starts turning the wheel in some direction, Captain Ilbury just turns around and says, "I didn't ask you to change course. Maintain your course, helmsman. Get us back onto course, whatever." They look at their compass, put the ship back on course, and on they go. The ship only turns when the captain says, and it only follows his course. A captain on a ship is very much outside of the weather, which he can't control. He is God on a ship. What he says goes. His will is above all. That's it. The captain would have either A, ordered the ship to keep ahead to Cape Town, or B, considering what he's seen so far of his ship being slightly top heavy and not doing so well in rough weather, and considering how much worse it's getting, maybe he might have considered turning back on his course and doubling back to Durban to try to wait out the storm. So if the ship turned around, it's because the captain thought that it was the best decision. But again, we don't know.
All right, man. Momosaurus Rex also asks, "Do you like moonlit strolls on the beach?" Yes, I do.
I guess I've not been to a beach since I was very little, but yeah, no, I guess that wouldn't be the worst thing ever. Can't say I've ever done it though.
Yeah, we'll get. It's one of those things. Eventually, you get time. You get a vacation. You can, take the missus on down.
Eventually, of course, that would be great for me, because if I go on vacation, it has to be somewhere with ships. Has to be. So the ocean, that's where I want to be.
All right, so American Steve, with the bow shape of the Waratah and it punching through waves, could it have been punching into one a bit too long and been forced under?
Yes, and in fact, this is also what we suspect happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yes,
that ship was already taking on water, was already laid down, heavily laden, and again, mentioning those similar cargoes that just shift around freely. If you factor that in, plus the amount of water that ship is taking, that 250 to 300 tons of water that it's taking over those well decks and holding on to as it's diving into the next wave, dropping into that next trough, so to speak, yes, I absolutely believe and am convinced that it probably punched through a very large wave and just dove and kept diving and basically went from a neutral to vaguely positive buoyancy to an absolutely negative buoyancy very, very fast, and just could not recover. And again, that's why you want to design a ship with a lot of extras, a lot of positive and reserve buoyancy. That's the word I'm looking for. A lot of reserve buoyancy. That way, when that does happen, you can take that punch and keep riding and keep going, even if your ship is punching through. But again, Waratah just did not have a heck of a lot of that reserve stability.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was one of the things that Claude Sawyer was saying, is all those waves coming over as it's punching through. So yeah, if it took a rogue wave, and that's the other thing too, if the captain had enough time seeing that rogue wave, if he had time to, he would have turned into it to try to take it over the nose. If that rogue wave was following the series of the other waves he would have been driving into, it would have just crashed head on into him. So whether it takes a rogue wave from the front or the side, it doesn't really matter. It's curtains for it, effectively. But yeah, absolutely. That's a very real possibility that could have happened to the Waratah.
All right. I think that we've covered all the points there. Say unless there's something else I'm missing.
No, the only other thing, I don't know if you guys would like to see this really neat photo. I know in our Titanic video, we talked about the Lusitania being a
Mm-hmm.
ship that was a competitor to the Titanic. Well, a year after, or less than a year actually, after the Waratah in January of 1910, she was sailing, she was just out of New York. I'm sorry, she was heading into New York when she encountered some very rough weather, very rough, and in fact encountered a rogue wave. And someone did a really good painting of said incident. I would like to share with you just to kind of give you guys a sense as to what it looks like when one of these big liners encounters something like this, and what that can actually look like. Let's see here. There we go.
Feral Housewife says, "Thanks for the stream, guys. It's always appreciative to have you around, Feral Housewife." Oh wow, yeah.
Now, Lusitania really struggled with taking that wave because Lusitania's bow is incredibly sharp and knife-like. It's designed to slice through the Atlantic Ocean at very high speed. And so when it took that wave, it kind of rode up, but also took it punched through it a little bit too, because it's really not designed for encountering waves of that magnitude, if you will.
Yeah.
So the wave was so high, it actually swept someone standing on the compass platform on top of the bridge and swept him back towards the back and basically knocked him to the ground, to the deck.
Oh wow.
Where he's leaning against this back railing, so it just knocked his butt back there. And so we estimate that it's a wave that was at least 85 to 90 foot in height.
Jeez.
And in fact, busted in all of the windows. I want to show you this one other photo that was taken after the Lusitania limped into port. This just kind of illustrates the force of this. All of her bridge windows are broken. She had to have a tarp.
Oh my gosh.
The railings are all bent backwards from the force of this. In the entire bridge structure, the physical room was permanently shifted back in its place by 3 inches. Yeah, so they left it that way. Like they still had all full functionality of the ship, but the physical structure was moved back, but it was still fixed in place. So
that's a lot of damage.
And it did that to Lusitania, which is a 787 foot long liner, like 32,000 tons. And compare that to little Waratah, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, geez. I mean, that's crazy. All right. Murph Turf says, "Awesome stream. Thank you, Kaiser and Grand Admiral Harlock." Lon Krim, thanks, has a pineapple and Grand Admiral Harlock. And Xcomer Triple Z, hey, how you doing, Xcomer? Didn't see you in there. Thanks for the stream. Night. All right, I think we're done here. So
I think so.
Again, everybody, please definitely, seriously, huge shout out to my guest for this evening, Grand Admiral Harlock. Thank you so much for coming out, bud. I appreciate it. And say I really enjoyed the heck out of our Titanic stream. So whenever you approached me about this one, I knew we had to do it, and yeah, you pitched the idea of doing it close to the date of her disappearance, and I'm like, yeah, we got to do it. So,
absolutely. I'm excited. I hope we can find more interesting content that I can present to all your viewers out there.
Yes, absolutely.
Hopefully, I'll be back again someday.
All right. Well, I mean, hey, we're one of these days we're gonna have to get your YouTube channel or whatnot, like all set up. I mean, I know you're talking about not doing specifically maritime stuff, which is fine, but I'm just saying we got to get you set up.
I have a small wheelhouse of stuff.
Yeah,
that's one of the big ones in the terms of the pie chart. It's one of the larger slices, but there's other content I like to cover as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for watching. Please, again, everybody go down there, hit that like button. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Thank you all so much for watching tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and play us out. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
You ever wonder why we're here? You ever notice that the information that we're being fed doesn't always add up to the truth? Do you ever look out your window at night when the rain's falling down? You ever look down the street and wonder what is going on around you? You ever look out at night and ask yourself, is this all that I am? Where am I? What am I? Is this all there is? Is this real life? As technology continues to bring us closer together, it also tears us further apart. We watch the skies and look at the planet around us and its natural beauty as it continues to march forward on and on and on, unending, unceasing, unwavering. And yet our world, everything that we've built, crumbles around us. We wonder, is this it? Is there more? There's got to be. We can search. We want to learn. We want to understand. We want to see all that we can see, know all that we can know. We want to look out there. We want to peek behind the veil. We want to ask the questions that nobody will answer. We want to light those fires, the sparks that ignite a curiosity in us. And we ask ourselves, what is out beyond all of that? Beyond the edge of reality?